Okay. Thank you very much. I apologize for being tardy here. We ran into some traffic problems and couldn't get around one way, and then we'd have a stoplight. Anyway, let me call the meeting to order. And Dee, could you do our Pledge of Allegiance, please? Thank you.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We have and we have the roll call, please, Miley?
Committee Member Ayer.
Present.
Committee Member Dolegowski.
Present.
Committee Member Dow.
Here.
Committee Member Schmidt.
Here.
Committee Member Van Noort.
Here.
Vice Chair Jacobs. Chair Ambrose.
Here. Thank you very much. Let's move on to approval of minutes. Does anybody have any comments about the minutes that you would like to adjust, amend, etc.? How about you gentlemen to my right?
Looks good to me.
Looks good to you?
Yes, I'm fine.
Okay, can I have a motion?
Motion to approve minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. That is a 6 people and 1 absence. Thank you so much. Next one. Number 2, special presentations. This should be really fun. Looking forward for a long time we have been. So right now we're looking at number 2A, Santa Fe Shoreline Monitoring Program, State of the Beach, Coastal Frontiers, scheduled approximately around 4:05.
And Chair Ambrose, just for public edification, we're recommending that with the will of the committee, if you swap B and C, the speakers for B and C, the speaker for B is not going to be available yet, so we're recommending to switch those after A.
Okay, thank you very much.
We pulling keyboards and mouse up, or how does this work? Okay. Is there a pointer on this?
There's not. Just a moment.
Are you able to push it to the screen as well?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. It's great to be here this evening. Today I'm going to share with you the most recent results from your shoreline monitoring program. And I know there's some new folks on the committee since the last time we were here, so I'll start with some background information and then get right into the findings. The fall of 2024 condition based on the survey that was completed last month, but also how did we get to this point, the shoreline evolution over the last couple decades. This is running on me. So the study area, of course, is San Clemente, specifically from Dana Point to San Mateo Point. And you're in the larger physiographic unit we call the Oceanside Littoral Cell, which runs down to La Jolla. So with that in mind, it makes sense why the city has joined in with Sandag for their Regional Beach Sand 3 project, because you're in the same littoral cell. Now, as far as beach nourishment, you know you guys have had a pretty active year and successful year with getting sand on the beach. The Army Corps of Engineer project near the pier placed about 114,000 cubic yards in April and May, and they're back right now finishing up with the balance of that material, 86,000 cubic yards, I believe. And then there was, here we go, that's better.
Thank you.
The emergency scoop program or opportunistic program brought 37,000 cubic yards of material to North Beach in the July to October period. And now when we look at the results here in a minute, keep in mind that our spring survey, our May survey, was conducted before that Corps of Engineers nourishment started going on the beach, and our October survey was conducted right after that North Beach sand went onto the beach. And so we've been conducting a shoreline monitoring program for you. This is our second go around on that. We did one in the early 2000s, and we started up again in 2022. The objective of the program is to measure changes in the shore zone so that we can understand the impacts of human intervention like nourishment projects or natural events like El Niños or in longer term sea level rise. We look at 12 sites between Doheny State Beach and Cottons Point, and we conduct beach profile surveys at those sites in the fall and the spring corresponding to the beginning and end of the winter wave season. The data are being used or have been used for numerous projects in the city, including the Corps' nourishment project that's happening now, the opportunistic nourishment at North Beach, as well as the nature-based adaptation study that's going on right now, and it's also supporting the Sandag Regional Beach Sand 3 feasibility study. So this is the location of our monitoring sites, or transects, again spanning from Doheny State Beach in the north to Cottons Point in the south. There's a lot of historical data available at these sites. Half of these, I'm not even touching it, but it's running on me. Half of these sites were included in the Corps of Engineers Coast of California Storm and Tidal Wave study in the 80s, so there's some information or beach profiles dating back to the 1980s. We conducted the program for the city in the early 2000s where we added 6 more sites for a total of 12. And then the current program is now funded from 2022 to 2025. And we've also gone back and obtained some publicly available LiDAR data to help fill in some of these temporal gaps. So what are we doing? We're collecting beach We're collecting beach profiles at these 12 sites, and that's essentially a cross-section of the beach. So we're measuring the elevation of the beach from the back beach all the way out to, in this case, a depth of about 45 feet. And I'm just showing the upper portion of the profile here because that's where all the change is happening. This is at T Street, and you can see the black line there. The heavy black line is the October 24 condition, so we're seeing the influence of the nourishment there. And then that big shaded gray area, that's the range of profiles or where the beach was in that 2001 to 2007 period. So you can see we were a lot wider than we were at the early part of the century. So the findings. So we'll talk about where we are right now, fall 2024, based on the survey that was conducted about a month ago. And we'll also look at the long-term changes that have occurred in the area. And then we'll look at how we got to this place, and the shoreline evolution over the past several decades. Okay, so this figure is showing, as the blue line, the fall 24 beach widths. And just to orient yourself, on the right-hand side of the map, that's Dana Point. The left-hand side is Cottons Point. The pier's pretty much right in the middle at transect SC 1660, that's T Street. And so you can see the beach widths range from effectively 0 at places like Mariposa Point to as wide as 180 feet up at T Street. And then when you look at it in context of the gray shaded area, that's the envelope of historical beach widths that have prevailed from 1983 to 2023. And so what you see is up in the northern part of the Doheny, we're kind of at the lower end of that envelope. So we've got historically narrow beaches in the Doheny area. In the Pier Bowl area from Linda Lane, T Street through San Clemente State Beach, we're kind of in the middle of that range or the upper end of the range. So we're kind of about average of where we've been over the last couple decades. So let's take that information and just look at the absolute net change in beach width between 2001 and 2024, so this 24-year period. Red here is going to indicate erosion, green is going to indicate accretion or gains, and we can see these losses up at the northern part of the area, Doheny State Beach, up to 100 feet. At the south end of the study area, Cottons Point, losses of up to 150 feet during that 24-year period. And we see this area in the middle by the Pier Bowl that has experienced gains. And also at North Beach. Now the North Beach piece, that little tick of green, that's produced largely because of the 37,000 cubic yards that were placed on the beach. the larger area of green by the pier is augmented by the core nourishment, but if I would have shown you this same comparison for last year, it would have been the same pattern that we've, over the last 20 years, gained material near the pier bowl even before the nourishment was placed. So now let's step down the beach and look at some representative sites just to kind of talk about what's happening in this region. So these are some plots that are in each of your shoreline monitoring reports, and these synopsis plots are intended to kind of gather all of the relevant information for a particular monitoring site into one place. So over on the upper right-hand side, there's a map showing where the transect's located. Below that, a photo taken during the most recent survey, just for context of what the beach looks like. Up on the top is our beach profiles, and we can look there. We see the shaded area. Again, that's the range of where the beach was in 2001 to 2007. The dark black line is the October 24 survey, and you can see it's one of the most eroded conditions on record. And as we move down to the next plot that's shaded in yellow, that's the time series of mean high water beach widths. So that's from the back of the beach out to where the profile intersects the elevation of NOAA mean high water. And you can see that we have several points in time where we have very wide beaches. And each of these corresponds to a time of very high rainfall. So the first one is after the 82-83 El Nino. The second one is after the 97-98 El Nino. And then there's one in 2005 when there was a particularly heavy year with one very large rainstorm. But over the long term, you can see that we've got this trend of decreasing beach width. So over the last 24 years, losing about 3.8 feet per year. So this illustrates what happens in a big rainfall year. We saw that big wide beach in 2005, and you can see here between the Google Earth image in April 2004 and April 2005, after all of those big rains, all the material that did come out onto the beach in 2005 from San Juan Creek. Stepping further south down the beach to Shore Cliffs, this is just to the north of the manufactured home community. And here you can see the profiles are not nearly as dramatic as up at Doheny State Beach. So everything's confined to a fairly small range. Wrong profile, a fairly small range. But if we look at the October 24, which is the dark black line, it's again one of the most eroded conditions on record. And as we look at the mean high water beach with time series, again, not as dramatic as what we saw up at Doheny State Beach, but if we look at over the last 2 decades, we're losing about 1.5 foot of beach per year. It's the long-term trend. Next, on to North Beach. And here, if we look at the profiles on the upper one, we see the dark black line again, October 2024, is one of the most accreted conditions on record, reflecting the 37,000 cubic yards that was delivered to the beach just before the survey was conducted. And when we look at the time series of beach widths, at the very end, we see that jump. That's the material placed on the beach and the gains that we received from that, but still taken over the long term over the last 2 decades, this is a slightly eroding beach, about half a foot per year. So we move closer to Mariposa Point at DJ Court. This is an area backed by a revetment, and you can see that when we look at the time series, the beach widths over the last 2 decades or more have all been less than 50 feet generally, and oftentimes eroded all the way back to zero or back to a revetment where it can no longer move further landward. But looking at the trend over the long term, because it can't really move much further back, it's pretty modest, but it is a negative at about 1/2 foot per year. Okay, now we'll move over to T Street. This is a profile that we used as an example earlier, and the black profile line on the top one is October 2024 again, and you can see the influence of the nourishment, that large hump out at the berm. And then when we look at At the mean high water beachwood time series, we can see that we've actually increased over time. So over the last 24 years, beaches there have been increasing at about 2.5 feet per year. Moving down to San Clemente State Beach, we look at the profile. We can't see the influence of the nourishment in there yet, so it hasn't moved to that location, which is not unexpected given the nourishment went on in the spring before the summer wave season. And as we look at the mean high water beachwood time series, we see that we've been gaining over time slightly, a trend of about 1 foot a year. And then when we get to the southern end of the study area at Cottons Point, this is another place where we've seen really dramatic changes. The profiles up at the top, you see again the gray area, that's where you were at the beginning of the century, 2001 to 2007, and then you have a series of profiles from the last couple of years at the very bottom, and you've lost pretty much all of that beach, and it's eroded back to the revetment. And if you look offshore, you can see that sand's been stripped away, and the profile becomes very jagged. It's probably exposed reef or rock out there. And as we look at the series of beachwoods, there's a modest trend of decreasing beachwoods at the beginning of the century, and then sometime around 2015, 16, 17, something happened, a switch flip, and the erosion increased dramatically. And as you can see, it's eroded all the way back to beach width of 0 in most cases. So in summary, beach widths vary dramatically along this reach from 0 feet in a place like DJ Corner, Mariposa Point, where you have the revetment causing that coastal squeeze effect, to as much as 180 feet at T Street. It's the widest beach in the region right now. We have historically narrow beaches at the north and south ends of the study area, Doheny and Cottons Point. But in the pier area, we're kind of average, maybe above average, as well as North Beach. So some of that is this long-term trend of material building up at the pier, but it also reflects the nourishment that was just placed at those locations. And then when we look at the long term, again, Doheny through Capo Beach has experienced a fair bit of erosion over the last 2 decades. We see the gains in the Pier Bowl area and losses at Cottons Point. So this program is funded through 2025. And you can see where we are in the program right now. There's basically one more monitoring year left in this, is spring 25 and fall 25 survey, and then we'll be back about this time next year to report to you on those results. Now, changing gears completely, given the subject matter of this committee, we wanted to share with you briefly some information about the offshore sand source investigation that we're just getting started with for you. And so the process of that investigation is to identify several candidate borrow sites based on existing information. And there's a fair bit of information dating back to the 1970s in the area. And from that, we'll work with city staff to select several borrow sites to go out and actually investigate. And by investigate, I mean potentially some remote sensing geophysical surveys if we feel like there's some unknowns, or probably just straight to vibrocoring, where we'll take a 20-foot core of the sand, which will allow us to test the physical properties and chemical properties of the sand and see if it's a good match for beach nourishment. And then when we finish that, we'll report on the results. And so the overarching objective of this is to find sand as close to San Clemente as possible, because it makes a big difference in the economics of a beach nourishment program. You know that the sand that's going on the beach right now came all the way from Surfside Sunset, the green box in the upper left-hand side, more than 30 miles away. So you can see if we're able to find sand right off the beach here, it's a game changer economically. So we'll start with that in mind, and if as necessary, move out from San Clemente to try to find good sand to support beach nourishment projects in this region. And so there is a fair bit of information in San Clemente. The Corps did a lot of work in the early 2000s when they were planning their nourishment project, and this is an example of that. This is results of their geophysical surveys. And the gray areas that you see are exposed rock or hard bottom. You can see over in the right where it says reef, the more square pieces, that's Wheeler Reef that was installed by SoCal Edison. And then the green lines are showing isopacks of sediment thickness. So the 0 foot line, anything landward of that line is just a thin veneer of sand over reef. And then as you work offshore from that 0 foot thickness line to the 10 foot thickness line, that's where the sediment layer is expanding to 10 feet deep, and it actually expands a little further, or offshore gets a little thicker. So we'll use this information to guide where we want to do our Vibra cores to actually get the physical and chemical properties of the sand. Now the Corps did do some of that in 2000s. That's the red dots here. That's where they cored and they found unsuitably fine sand. So then the question is, okay, is there any place else we can look at here, because the prize is so high, it's so important to find sand as close as possible. So it's possible, we're still working through the information now. We've gotten all the raw data from the Corps and others. And so it's possible that it may be worth looking further north where those yellow dots are, closer to Doheny and the harbor. But USC did some coring back in that area in the early or the late 70s, so we want to make sure we don't go to the same places that they did. We want to make sure that we're sampling a different area. And USC didn't have the benefit of a very good geophysical map like we did. So we're going to explore that. And then the other spot that caught the geologist's eyes is in the lower right-hand side, where you can see those green contours push offshore. Thinking, well, maybe that's an ancient beach or bar shoal, and so that might be worth some exploration as well. And so if we're unsuccessful here, again, we'll have to expand further out, because the geology is going to be what it is. It's millions of years old, and there are other places where we think we may be able to find sand as well. And this is just kind of some photos to kind of put in your mind what that exploration looks like. Left-hand side is the Vibra unit being lowered over the back of the boat, a tripod type unit with a long 20-foot barrel. Inside that barrel is an acetate tube. You can see that being pulled out of the barrel on the upper right, so that captures the sample. We bring it up onto deck, cut it in half, so now we can access the sand. We can log the properties of that sand through the entire 20-foot core, take the samples as necessary, send them to the lab, get the physical characteristics, grain size mainly, and make sure there's no chemical contaminants in the sand. And that's what we've been working on for you guys in the last year or so. Any questions?
You've been busy.
We appreciate the honor of being able to learn more about your beaches and help you guys manage them.
I have a few questions. On the shoreline monitoring program, you mentioned that a lot of beach width expansion occurred with heavy rain years. That's sediment being introduced from San Juan Creek. Is San Juan Creek still capable of producing the sediment it has historically? If we get a big rain year, are we going to still get that kind of expansion?
That's a good question. I was surprised that we didn't see a similar bump the last couple of years when we did have some big rain years. Jonathan Work at USGS did some work on rivers in Southern California, historical versus current sand yield, and he estimated that historically San Juan Creek was 40,000 cubic yards per year, so about the same amount that went on North Beach, and currently it's about 40,000 cubic yards per year, so there hasn't been much change. However, like all California river systems, it's extremely episodic. That 40,000 cubic yards that's spread out over many years, so it probably is coming in a couple slugs with these big El Niños and whatnot, so you might not see it but every 10 years or 15 years.
Do we have reason to believe that just because of development that has continued to occur and other changes that have been made to the inland environment, that it's potentially less likely that we're going to get the sediment flows that we have historically?
It's possible. Warwick did his study in 2002, so there would have to have been some changes since then that changed that watershed. I'm not sure if there have been or not. I haven't followed that very closely, but that is a theme for why Southern California beaches are in the state that we are in, because of channelization, but also because there was a very wet period from about 1920 to 1945, 50, that right up to the post-war period, very wet period. So we probably had pretty wide beaches historically, and then we had that drought that went all the way through the 70s at the same time that our population was exploding. So that's part of it as well.
Did the monitoring, I wasn't able to read it closely enough to see if when the dredging of Dana Point Harbor took place, and I think put over 2 million cubic yards of sand, did that show a huge bump?
I wish I had the data to see that, but our data is only going back to 1983. That was done in 66. I think there was almost 3 million cubic yards placed on the beaches up to like 1970. Not only from the harbor, but they brought some sand from Pendleton Bluffs in, and then there was another opportunistic program. I can't remember what it was. A development on the beach side where they took the spoils and put them on the beach. So there was a lot of nourishment in the 60s up through 70s, and not much at all since.
And then the other item on the shoreline monitoring project, that on State Beach, I think your data showed that there was a net gain in beach, and that just doesn't comport with kind of my observations of that beach. It seems like it's significantly narrowed over the last few years.
Well, let's look at it. So this might be partly where our location is in State Beach, and so it's at the tunnel where the lifeguards come under the tunnel, under the tracks. So it's south of the Calafia parking lot by a bit. So you can see in the last couple of years, since 2002, by my eye, that trend's negative. But since 2001, it's positive.
And there's a nearshore reef right between Calafia and State Park, right between that tunnel, right? I just want to confirm that with everybody on here. So there is a natural speed bump in that region.
Well, that area, South State Beach, is one of the areas that OCT has identified as a critical area for their infrastructure because there's so little beach.
Right, so it's kind of, in my mind, it's a question, if you look a little further down at Cotton's Point where you've had an incredible amount of erosion, is that wave going to make its way up into State Beach, or is State Beach where it starts to stabilize? So that's one thing that we're watching really closely.
I have some questions on the study for the borrow site. Did anybody have any questions on the shoreline?
Just anecdotally, I was out at T Street when they were doing measurements with the boom. It was fun to talk to the environmental consultants. They seem to enjoy themselves.
It's not a bad gig if the waves aren't too big. If the waves are big,
Yeah, they were
we're
struggling
getting
a little bit. Yeah. Yeah, it was fun.
How long do they stay out when they go for a search or?
Oh, for the survey, so we do it in two pieces. There's a boat piece and a land piece. So the land piece is your typical survey instrument that you would sight through with a 15-foot rod with a prism on it, and you got a good swimmer. We always use lifeguards. And then they'll swim out, and like about every 20 feet, they'll hold that rod up on the bottom of the seabed and take a shot, and then swim further out and so forth. So to do all 12 of these lines takes us pretty much sun up to sundown on the land side. The boat goes a little bit quicker.
And they were saying that the boat is necessary on the Cotton's Point area now because there's no beach.
Yeah, that kind of surprised us when we restarted this program after a 16-year hiatus, because we used to drive down to Cotton's Point, and then we couldn't. So fortunately, there's a homeowner in Cypress Shores that allows us access to his backyard, and then the swimmer can't walk down the beach. The boat's got to drive him down the beach and drop him off, and instead of working his way out, he works his way in. So it's been a challenge.
So what months are you on again? You're 2 months a year, correct?
October, which
Right.
is beginning right before the winter storms happen. So theoretically, that's the end of the summer season. You would have your widest beaches, and then in May, we're trying to capture the condition after the winter.
I think I talked to you about this before at one of the presentations, maybe a month ago, at Stance. But I was asking you, what kind of difference do you think it would make in your findings if you increased the times that you went out to look for this?
I think we would have a better understanding because realistically, the May condition is probably not the most eroded condition.
Right.
It's going to be right after a storm. So if we were to go quarterly, we'd learn some more. But, you know, we try to be seasonally consistent so we can make good year-to-year comparisons and long-term comparisons. And in my experience with these type of programs, if they become so large and so costly that they die of their own weight, you lose that benefit of, like what Sandag has, is 30 years worth of data. And they understand their beaches pretty well, and they use that information to seek grant funding to justify beach nourishment projects and to understand how their beach nourishment projects have formed. So in my mind, it's that balance between science and budget. And the longer you can run one of these programs, the more you're going to learn, I think.
Okay.
How far back does your study start? When did you start?
So the Corps did some stuff from like 82 to 89, and then we picked it up for the city and added more sites in 2001. That was really to support the Corps project. That's how long they've been planning that
They had
project.
6 sites and you have 12 now.
We have 12 now,
So
and
you
we've
have 30 plus years of data.
30 years, but not consistent, so there's these big gaps in there. So we missed a couple El Niños and things like that.
Just so I understand, you're measuring from mean high tide? Is that your,
That's what I'm calling my beach width. So if we look at this figure here, the 0 point on that, the 0 range on the x-axis, the dark line, we'll call that the back of the beach.
Right.
And then we follow that out along that, where that profile intersects the mean high water elevation, and that's a NOAA-derived elevation.
okay.
And where that profile intersects mean high water, that's the beach width. So it's a very repeatable number that you can calculate straight from the profile data. What the profile data also gives us, it allows us to calculate the volume of sand in the system too, above water volume or volume out to what we call the depth of closure, to try to understand how much sand is in the system. And theoretically, if you're losing sand from the system, you're going to lose beach width. If you're increasing sand in the system, you should gain beach width.
Did you studying from high water mark down out a distance out into the ocean, do you take into consideration anything behind you?
Oh, well, let's see.
Well,
Can I walk up here and just point?
What I'm referring to is the railroad tracks and whatever natural dunes there are, whatever else.
So this is T Street. This is starting right at a light post. That's where our monument is. So this is at elevation plus 20.
Okay.
So this is the dry beach. There's lots of recreation happening up here. Here, this bump right here is the nourishment that was just placed on the beach. It's for the profiles further out than anything else. And then you cross this line, which is the mean high water elevation. So our beach width is this distance right here.
My question is, did you turn the camera around, as it were, and do any analysis or information gathering about what's inward 20 to 50 to 100 yards and what's happened over the last 30 to 40 years in terms of primarily revetment on the part of the railroad, OCTA, and drawing any causal conclusions about any relationship between the two? I know that's a complicated question, but
It's a
it kind of gets to the
complicated
point of what we're doing here.
Right, but we are taking this data from as far landward as you can go, so at the revetment to offshore. So we're capturing all of that. We can't go onto the tracks and up the revetment because of the railroad right of way. And so we are capturing all of that at these sites.
Okay. But for example, I mean, Cottons has had a lot more riprap dumped over the last couple of years, and they've had the most dramatic decrease in beach.
Right.
But you're not drawing any conclusions for any of your constituency or the people who are hiring you?
Well, at Cottons, it's, there was a revetment there in 2001 when we started monitoring it. And the area where our transect is actually is a fair bit south of where the railroad dumped all that new riprap. So it's fairly unchanged as far as the revetment goes. But there's clearly been something that's changed in the coastal processes, probably wave climate related, that's caused all of that erosion, and it's halted at that revetment because it has no further to go.
Can I get you to look at one more slide? The one about offshore depth is really interesting. I didn't realize that information was so readily available.
In the
One that showed the depth of sand out, and you had those.
I don't think it's readily available. I think they keep it kind of secret.
Yeah, where did that information come from? That was,
You can, I think
This one,
yeah. So you can't.
Yeah,
have a summary
I've never seen
come
this
in
before.
or something.
So this was done by the Corps of Engineers in 2002 to support your project as part of their sand search. And what they did was they did side scan sonar, which gives you like a black and white type
Right.
image of the bottom, and they used that to map all of the hard bottom because you can easily tell the difference between sand and reef. That's all the gray areas near the pier and whatnot. And then they also ran what they call sub-bottom profiles, real low frequency sound that penetrates the seabed. And as it penetrates the seabed, it can see the difference between layers right at the top of the surface and where the bedrock layer is underneath the sand. So that's what those sediment thickness isopachs are developed from that sub-bottom profile. I wish I have a really nice image which would actually show you that, but it's not in this presentation, unfortunately. But it's that low frequency energy that's penetrating the sediments to where it hits the hard bottom, and you can see those layers, and that's how it's mapping the thickness of sediment.
but they're saying there's no sediment inside of that top green line, right?
That's correct. It's just a thin veneer of sediment that moves across the reef.
So the
from
concept
seaside.
of people saying, why don't we just pull sand from our beaches out a mile or two is really kind of erroneous because there is no depth of sand built up offshore. Am I interpreting that correctly?
That's correct until you get to that 10-foot sediment thickness isopatch. And so when we're looking for a dredge site, we want to make sure that there's enough sediment thickness that the dredge can actually dig a hole, right? And not be banging around
Sure.
on hard bottom. But we also need to be probably no deeper than about 65, 70 feet of water, because US flagged vessels, that's about as deep as they can dredge. So we're kind of gonna have to find this sweet spot where there's enough sediment, thickness of sediment to productively dredge, but it's not so far offshore that the dredge can't reach it.
So Wheeler Reef was built before June of 2002?
Yeah, so this is the first stage of Wheeler Reef, so
And that's now been extended, right?
it has. So that's part of our mission here, is to make sure we know where all of the real Wheeler Reef components are, because there's no sense exploring for sand in the middle of Wheeler Reef because we'd never be able to dredge it.
I would think a lobster fisherman would love to get their hands on it.
And what's the water depth in that area?
It's not shown on this particular figure. I think that if I recall correctly, that 10-foot sediment thickness isopac line is in about 60 feet of water.
Right on the edge.
Yeah.
Is this available?
Yeah, this is straight from the Corps of Engineers report. I know Leslie has it. And I've requested basically the raw data from the Corps so that we can peel back the layers of the onion and understand it even better as we try to determine where to look for sand. And that survey went from, that outfall line to the one just outside of Dana Point Harbor, and you can see San Mateo Point at the bottom. It covered your whole city. It was a really impressive piece of work that the Corps did.
Really good.
How many spots have you been told that there may be a borrow site in this area?
Well, that's up to us to understand where to look in San Clemente and with the best probability of finding sand. So that's why we're looking at this information from USC. Dr. Whitelaw, I think, is trying to find some cores for us from those studies in 1979. We want to make sure we understand exactly where those were taken and what the sediment properties were, and then we'll work with city staff to say, okay, well, where should we look? Where's the best bang for your buck? Where's the best probability of finding sand? And again, if you can find something right off of San Clemente, it's a big prize, so it may be worth the risk of, well, you know, there's probably a lower probability that we find something, but if we do, it's a home run.
Right.
It obviously would be a huge game changer to find a borrow site that's closer. And so I guess it would be helpful if you just maybe went into a little more detail, sharing with us how you're going to whittle that. So you got information that's readily available through past studies, and that can give you some idea of where there may be the site with potential. And then there's not only the potential because it has the quality sand and the requisite amount of sand where it makes sense to get it permitted as a borrow site. And then you have the proximity to San Clemente.
Right.
So is there some formal way that you're creating kind of a decision matrix that kind of as you get more information, you kind of whittle down and you use, because we have this $800,000 grant. We obviously want to make sure it's utilized as sensibly as possible. Because if we can find it, and it is a home run. It's a massive changer. Because all these all these SAM programs that we have going on, whether it be the federal program or SANDAG, they all contemplate dredging. And so if we can reduce the cost, that's big. So can you just share with us how you'll methodically kind of go through, and as you get more information, whittle down onto where we should focus?
Sure. So actually, the place where we have the best and most information is actually at San Clemente because of the work that the Corps did in the early part of the century. This map that's showing the sediment thickness isopacks. So we know where our sweet spot is for sediment thickness. They've also done the cores, sediment cores in the red. And every one of those cores came back unsuitably fine. So as much as 50% fines in some cases. So that what we define fines is passing the number 200 sieve. So the number 200 sieve it's finer than a window screen. It's like you can barely blow through it. So it's kind of in the silt range.
And that's what it would erode very quickly if you did.
Right, it cause a lot of turbidity and things like that. For beach nourishment, we want to match what's on the beach, or ideally a little coarser. So we don't want to go back to the same places that the Corps did. Nothing's going to be different. Nothing's changed out there. We're looking at material that's 100 million years old or 10,000 years old. Nothing's going to have changed in the last 20 years. So we don't want to repeat what the Corps did. So the thought is, well, do we need to fill in some of the gaps there? Is there any reason to believe that there might be a deposit of coarser sand in between? Maybe. We're still working through that. And then there's the area closer to the harbor, which I've identified by the yellow cores. And USC did some work up there and also found it's unsuitably fine. So what we need to understand is exactly where those cores. What I have is hand-drawn maps. Dr. Whitelaw, having worked at that lab at USC, may be able to give us some more information to understand where those were, because we don't want to repeat the same thing that they did. And in our geologist's mind, it's that ancient beach bar in the south that probably has the best chance. It hasn't been looked at by anybody else yet. There's some reason, to believe that those contours are pushing out. Could have been an old river channel or a stranded beach bar. So that is a spot that certainly has our attention. Beyond that, you're looking at that bullseye and how far things are from San Clemente. And there's a spot in Camp Pendleton that we've identified. There's a break in the kelp, which means that there's probably not hard bottom for the kelp to attach to. And there's some scripts, sub-bottom records that appear to show the Pleistocene layer kind of coming up and daylighting pretty close to the Holocene layer. That Pleistocene layer is where we've had our most success in San Diego. It's that 100 million year old material. It's kind of that orangey color, a lot like what came from Surfside Sunset. So that spot's got our attention there. And then I don't see a lot of reason to go back down to the Oceanside area, considering the outcome of this last dredging cycle. And then the next spot, there's not much off of Laguna Beach, it's just all hard bottom. And then the next spots are up in that Huntington Beach and Santa Ana River. It's a similar deposit as what's up at Surfside Sunset. There is some information up there, some very widely spaced cores that would suggest that the material is going to be beach quality. There's very large areas. I think there's estimates of 135, 150 million cubic yards of potentially suitable material up there. So if with staff, we decide that that's an area worth exploring, it's a matter of zeroing in on an area, proving it out as being beach quality. And if you can see if you get 10 miles closer than Surfside Sunset, that's going to help. It's going to help. It's not going to be right off the beach, which is what we want.
Is the yellow site that's within the 5 mile radius, is that San Mateo Creek?
Yeah, that's that ancient bar that I've
Two-way.
put down here.
So I would just like to call out to the committee that you have to be cognizant of time.
Oh, definitely, yes.
I just have one quick comment on the San Mateo site. I just think it's very important that to the extent that that's examined and we get too far, that does seem like it has potential. That obviously is going to be one that's of concern to any surfer because it's upper trestles. It's second probably most popular quality surf break. And if that did anything to the bathymetry in that area, it would be a big cause for concern.
Absolutely, and I think that spot's going to be far enough north to avoid that, but that is absolutely a concern, and a reason that, I mean, there's a lot of hard bottom and kelp south of that area, so it kind of takes it off the table anyway, but I wouldn't be comfortable doing anything that could remotely affect a place like Trestles.
It would just have to be something that if it was pursued, that the information would have to be out there and a PR campaign kind of to let everybody know.
Exploring, it's not going to cause any problems, but if we find what we want and we need to exploit it, then that could potentially be an issue.
One quick closing question. Is Oceanside still using their borrow site that the state gifted them with? Are they getting sand as product?
Oceanside for both regional beach sand 1 and 2 use material from further to the south at what they call SO5 and SO6, which is off of Del Mar in Carlsbad, I believe. Jamie Timberlake might know.
SO6?
Yeah, SO6, which is kind of further south.
Hardin.
Okay.
That's where the sand from regional beach sand 1 and 2. They also get sand from the Corps that they pull out of the harbor every year. That's not new sand, that's just kind of recycling what goes into the harbor.
Thank you very much.
One more quick question is, say you find a borrow site, maybe the ancient sandbar that looks good. Is there an expectation of how big a normal borrow site is? Is it hundreds of thousands of cubic yards, millions of cubic yards? Is this like we find one site and we're set for the future, or is this we need 5 sites?
Yeah, well, it depends on how much sand is in your future, right? Ideally, you would find a borrow site with a couple million cubic yards in it that could serve your needs for decades. That would be the hope. For the Corps of Engineers up at Surfside Sunset, that federally funded project, they've exploited probably 6 or 7 borrow sites and put, I'm going to guess, about 20 million cubic yards of sand on the beach since the 60s. So I mean, they've got a nice ready source there. And it's close enough that they sit on top of it and pump it right to the beach, as opposed to put it in a hopper, move to San Clemente, hook it up to the discharge line and pump it onto the beach. So that's another, and again, if you find sand right off the coast, it's a game changer economically.
Thanks.
How far offshore do you have to be in order, if you're excavating or sucking sand off the bottom, how far offshore do you have to be where you would not be negatively impacting the overall sand profile?
That's a great question. So we want to be outside of what we call the depth of closure. That's that depth, theoretical depth, where sand's not really being moved around much by waves and currents anymore. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the offshore boundary of what we call our littoral system. So if we bring sand from outside of that depth of closure into it, we're adding sand to our system. And that's what we want to do. So in San Clemente, based on the profiles, it looks like it's kind of in the 20-foot solar range. I'm a little skeptical of that because I think there's not enough sand to really move where it wants to. So I think realistically we need to be looking in water depths of no shallower than 30 feet, probably 35, 40 feet.
And then how wide is that band then between that say the 10-foot sediment isopack contour and the limiting depth of water for the barge to work. You referenced 60 to 70 feet. Is that a width of like a mile or something? Or
That's like between the 0 foot and the 10 foot there is 2 kilometers.
oh, okay.
I'm sorry, 1 kilometer. Those are 2 1 kilometer. So it's, the Varna site out here would probably be kind of oriented coast parallel, so you can get the most sand in the water depth that you want.
And do those sand sources represent an ancient beach environment, or is that sand that was brought in from
Most
estuaries, rivers?
Yeah, that's what you don't have here is the biggest problem. So like SO5 and SO6 down at Del Mar, that's an ancient fluvial deposit from when sea level was probably at a much lower stand, hundreds of million years old. And so that's where we've had our most luck at finding sand. So like the one off of Newport and Huntington Beach, that's Santa Ana River.
Yeah.
Historically, yeah. And then the one at Surfside Sunset is probably from the LA River, where it was free to meander all over the valley there.
Okay.
Well, I thank you very much
All right,
for
thank you.
coming.
You're welcome. Sorry to take up so much time.
Well, it was very interesting and pretty vital to our interest, that's for sure. Thank you. Alrighty, let's move on to number 2, item C. Is Mr. Saunders here?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. How are you all? Okay. How are you?
Doing great, thank you.
Great. My first time visiting the group, and I'm pleased to share some work that we've done studying the way sand moves along the coastline here at Capistrano Bight. Looking around. Evening, everybody. So I got to get used to the multi-dimensional format here.
Yes.
I almost feel like I want to go stand in front of the picture, but does this work? Does it pointer?
You can do that if
Can
you
we
want
do
to.
this? That sort of works.
Oh,
No, but it doesn't show on the screen, right?
It shows on the wall.
But I can do this, right? With this mouse, I can change my slides. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll change your slides.
Do you need me on the microphone, or can I just say, don't need the microphone?
We're doing an audio recording.
Where's my little lapel microphone?
Yeah.
All right, so I'd like to share with you some work we've done over the last few years, just trying to understand the way sand moves along the coast. And we had, fortunately, had some grant that was made by the Coastal Commission through the city of Dana Point, which allowed us to do kind of more detailed investigation of the sand movement right along the northern Capistrano Bight. So up here where the San Juan Creek empties into the Capistrano Bight. And we think that's a really important spot to be trying to understand sand movement because, as Greg indicated, one of the biggest sources of sediment historically in this region has been San Juan Creek, which some estimates have, annual delivery rates on the order of 70,000 cubic yards per year on average, others 40. The reality is there's very little good data telling us. These numbers oftentimes cite reports that then cite other reports that then cite other reports, and this information is limited. So, but I think we're pretty confident that the San Juan Creek and the San Mateo Creek are the two big contributors of sand to this stretch of the coastline. Cliff erosion is another important contributor to sand historically, but as we develop the coastline and we armor properties and vegetation grows on cliffs, that supply is also cut off. So these contours here, this color coding of the beach, shows the beach width trend, the average trend from 1985 to 2021. And there's a lot of red lines there. And all those red lines all signify average rates of beach loss over a 40-year period of 3 feet per year. So this is a rate, an area where, since the 80s on average, this has been thinning out. So we've been interested in why that's happening. Greg shared with you his shoreline data, which he graciously shared with us as part of this study. And it was data that his group has collected and was also collected by the U.S. Army Corps. And two of these profiles are in our study area, so we thought it's definitely worthwhile to have a look at those profiles. The red lines show the most recent data that we had access to, which was in the 2020s. I won't bother you with which exact year and date it was, but we have 2020s in red. In the blacks, you see the 2000s, and in the grays, you see the 1980s. So perhaps the easiest thing to do is focus your eyes in the lower right-hand corner of that diagram, which is this profile 1805, which kind of comes out off of near the Capistrano Beach Park. And you can see that, boy, that's an area that's just really retreated a lot since the 80s, shifting back towards the coast to the black lines in the 2000s and back again to the red lines in the 2020s. And then if you look closer to San Juan Creek, you see lines all over the place. And that's a place where the river deposits sand after wet years, and you can see a whole lot of sand pushed out there. And so there's quite more dynamic, it's less a one-way trend. But another interesting, I think, feature about that I'm going to have to leave the mic momentarily, but over here, near the outlet, we also see that there is red lines sitting somewhat above the black lines in some of the shallow water there. So that's not beach per se, but there's maybe a little bit of beach, but that's also the sort of the shallow water off of San Juan Creek that's showing some accumulation of sand. And so this kind of feeds into our thinking about how exactly and how effectively is sand coming out of San Juan Creek, how effectively is that moving down the coast and onto beaches that line both the Dana Point coastline there and the San Clemente coastline further south. So this is something that we're kind of been interested in. You were asking about long-term trends. This is some trend data going back to 1940. So I had some undergraduate students a few years ago collect aerial photos that were available from the Orange County Surveyor's Office, and they have aerial photos that going back to like the 1940s, and you can use those aerial photos to see how wide beaches were at different times. And so we had them kind of digitize those photos and measure beach widths and create a map of how the beaches were changing from the 1940s to the 1990s. We did this for the whole county. We have this from Huntington Beach down here to San Clemente. And we've color-coded, we did those same transects, so we looked at a transect every 100 yards or so along the coast, came up with an average sort of beach width for each one, and then just used this colored shading to represent the sort of variability we saw within that zone. So if you look at the map on the upper right-hand side, you'll see a bunch of areas that are labeled pink. And that's all land that falls within the Doheny State Beach. And in Doheny State Beach, in the 40s and 50s and 60s, the beach was variable, but maybe declining a little bit. And then between 1960 and 1970, the beach, on average, got like 2 to 3 times wider. And we probably all know why that was. With the construction of Dana Point Harbor, and we heard about the 2 million cubic yards of sediment that was made available at that time, and the beach was widened. And so the beach there widened substantially. Over that same period of time, there wasn't a whole lot of change to the beach widths seen at Capo State Beach or within what we call the Capistrano Bay Services District, I think is what the proper name is of that sort of beach road community there along the coastline. But then after 1990, there was quite a bit of drop in beach width observed in our data. So interestingly, from 1960 to 1970 with the big nourishment, substantial widening, but then it kind of suggests that you got maybe 2 decades of benefits from that nourishment. That this 2 million yards gave you kind of 20 years of run out. And you can almost also imagine that perhaps that sediment, that beach that was thinning out, was also serving the San Clemente coastline as a supply of sand. So you lose beach from one area. If it was pulled down coast, potentially that could be considered like one of the contributors to sand supply through the central part of the San Clemente coast. But we don't know for sure. We don't have good models of exactly how the sand moves up and down the coastline. Our understanding is somewhat limited. We know that when southerly waves come, they tend to come from the south and push the sand up the coastline, and when we get the winter waves that come in from the northwest, they move sand down the coastline. But then another factor that I've been thinking about is, well, gosh, how does this Dana Point Harbor also figure into the ability of sand to come down the river, hit the coast, and then make a left turn and head on down the coastline? And I've yet to get anybody to give me a good answer of how that's affected things. No one's done a study to figure out precisely what that means. But we can tell you something about how it affects the wave climate. It's one thing just to look at the waves, it's another to understand how the waves and the currents move the sediment. And if you look at that red line on the 1938 drawing, you can see it sitting right on top of waves that are moving almost due west. So basically, the typical waves that we get out of the northwest would normally come around Dana Point, and they would sweep across this Killer Dana coastline, and they would push sediment from the outlet of San Juan Creek straight on down towards Capistrano Beach Park and further down the San Clemente coast. But now they can't do that because there's a breakwater there, and it creates a shadow. So the breakwater now creates a shadow, and San Juan Creek outlet sits in the shadow with respect to westerly wave energy. And so I made a little diagram here, which appeared in a report, which I prepared for the city of Dana Point, which is available online if anybody wants to kind of take a look at it, showing how this sort of Dana Point Harbor breakwater, and the lower left-hand drawing, labeled B, I'm kind of showing what northwesterly waves would have done prior to the construction of the harbor. And the arrows in panel D show that those waves would be expected to push sediment mainly down the coast, but there'd also be a cross-shore component. Waves do both cross-shore and along-shore sand movement. And the thinking is that now that breakwater is there, the waves from the northwest have to make a left-hand turn in order to reach the outlet of San Juan Creek. The waves tend to come in, as shown in panel C, the waves tend to come in more in a cross-shore direction, which you would expect to create stronger cross-shore movement of sand and weaker along-shore movement of sand. Until you get down into these areas. Once you get down in here, these areas the waves are not so affected by the harbor. But there's this shadow area where the waves are completely different from how they would have been prior to 1970. And we don't know how that's moving sand. So it's a knowledge gap. Well, opportunistically in 2023, there was this project to take sand, which had accumulated in the Santa Ana River, and was going to be headed to an inland sorting facility and probably to a landfill or a construction site. And with leadership of Orange County and California State Parks, they worked out a plan to truck that material from Fountain Valley down the 405 and 5 freeway and bring it to Doheny State Beach and place that material at Doheny State Beach. And this is something that we like to, this is restoring a natural process per se. I mean, naturally we would have seen sand move all the way to the coastline with storms and deliver sand to the coastline. This is like nature's way of feeding beaches with sand. But with the retooling of our infrastructure and the way we manage flood control, leaving the sediment in the channel is problematic. You start losing growing vegetation, you start losing flood channel capacity, you start creating habitat for endangered species, and you're never going to sort of get your flood channel back. So the county is pretty good at cleaning those flood channels because they don't want to see it turn into a wetland, which then they can't manage anymore. So they're pretty adamant about getting those channels cleaned out, and they're looking to share that sediment. And they're looking across the entire county to create places, staging areas, where this sediment can be made available for coastal cities like San Clemente and others to bring to the coastline. But finding the money to truck it is always like the big price tag item. So with this project going on, we used this small grant that was made available from the Coastal Commission through the city of Dana Point to do some drone monitoring of how that sand moved after it was put on the beach. And I thought I'd share some results of that with you all today, if that's of interest to you. The nourishment took place for several months. There were hundreds and hundreds of trucks that came and dropped sand over many weeks. And these photos here sort of show from August to September to October how you can kind of see how the beach widened out a little bit there. And so we put up our little drone into the air. We create lots of ortho photos. We fly the drone. We give it a flight plan. It takes lots of photos and uses digital photogrammetry to piece together a three-dimensional model of the beach. Then tells you the high points and the low points and everything else. We do some ground control points with traditional survey points to try to have a few validation points and calibration points along the way. And during this time, we know the waves are going to be pushing the sand around, so we want to know exactly, what the wave conditions are during this period of time. So on this drawing, I'm showing you a history. It kind of looks like a cardiograph if you go into the hospital, but this is a time series of how the wave conditions changed along this stretch of the coastline from August 2023 through April of 2024. And it's a great way it kind of captures the shift in the wave direction, the ever so subtle shift in the wave direction, which is really important for sand dynamics. So where do I start? Can I go up here?
Yeah.
Apologies to the people at home. I'll speak loudly, but I think that the people here deserve the best possible presentation of this material. Okay, so this is first of all wave direction. We talk about waves from the south, we talk about waves from the north. They don't change a whole heck of a lot. But that blue line is the average shore normal direction. Okay, so the average shore normal direction around here is say around 220 degrees, maybe 218 degrees. That's where the blue line sits. So if the waves are coming in with an angle closer to 200, that means they're coming a little bit from the south of the normal direction. And once they get to the other side of that blue line, that means they're coming from the west or the northwest, and they're going to push sand down the coast. So in the beginning of our study period, we have mainly a summer, fall-y condition with mostly southerly waves. And then in December, in January, we shifted into this environment where we had much more westerly waves. That's our winter condition. So that's one shift that took place in the study area, which is sort of notable relative to what we saw in terms of the sand movement. Another interesting feature here is that we had two sort of prominent episodes of wave activity. We had Hurricane Hilary that you may remember rolled in, and there's concerns about really big swells coming. It turned out the storm went a little more inland, so it wasn't quite the sort of disaster we might have worried about along our coast. And then later there was this winter storm period, which I'm characterizing by westerly waves, more northwesterly waves. So, and also this is the wave height, so how big the waves are. So big waves came in the winter, big heights coming from the west. And the periods were all over the place. We had periods up to 20 seconds. But look, what was amazing about Hilary was how short the wave period is. The wave period for Hilary was like 5 seconds. Really short period waves. And they weren't super big. They were only like 1.3 meters, so we're in the 4-footy range, something like that. But boy, that short period wave really ate up the beaches. So I'll show you with some data. So the first story is that Hurricane Hillary came along right after the nourishment and just took a bite out of the coastline. Really took a bite. And this drawing here shows the direction and strength of sand movement up and down the coast that we would expect based on something called the Circle equation, which is a coastal engineering formula for the potential of the waves to push sand either up coast or down coast. So in the top part are areas where you expect the sand to be pushed up the coast, and the bottom part are where you'd expect the sand to be pushed down the coast on it. And it's not what actually happens, because this assumes that there's ample supply of sand to be pushed, and we know sometimes it's just rocks and there's no sand to be pushed around. Okay, so this graphic here, the very top part is a plan view of the shoreline right at the location where sand was placed. This is Doheny State Beach, the placement area, and the colored lines show the elevation of the ground as measured by this survey method. And you can see that the highest elevations are a little more than 11 feet. The lower elevations showed they were like in the 5 to 7 foot range. We fly at low tide and try to get as much of the beach as we can, but we can't see underwater. So unfortunately, I can't do what Greg did, which is show you exactly what's happening underneath the water. So this drone is just seeing what you can. Okay, so the first plot is just showing you, okay, there's our beach, so what? December 13th is 1 month later, and there we're showing elevation change as compared to August. And in this plot, you can see in these light brown and dark brown areas are where the sand was placed on the beach with trucks. So we can see in here, for example, this was part of the placement area where sand was placed. And then the blue areas are areas where the elevation is lower than it was in August. And there's areas there where up to 3 feet of vertical erosion took place in 1 month. Okay, and that was Hillary. So that was the area where we placed sand on the beach. Hillary came, took a bite out of the coast, 1 to 3 feet of elevation change. And then by October 11th, we're seeing a little bit of recovery. So all those are light browns. That's 1 to 3 feet, basically, of vertical elevation gain along the lower portion of the beach there. And and then the upper part of the beach is not changing a whole lot. So there we're seeing some recovery, sand coming back on. So that's like the first little time series. I'm going to show you a series of time series for different parts of the coast. So now we're going to go a little bit down the coast to Capo Beach. This is just down coast of the first area. You can see the Capo Beach parking lot on the upper left-hand side, and then you get into this area where the beach road houses are all lined up there. The top graphic shows the elevation of the beach from our August survey, and the second graphic, September 13th, shows the elevation change in 1 month between August and September. And there you can see the effects of Hillary. So Hillary took, like I said, a 1 to 3 foot bite out of the beach, even more than 3 feet in some places along that stretch of the coastline. It was 1 day. The waves were really short, the 4-period waves, not super big, only 4 foot high, but it's those really short waves that can really chew up a coastline. Now it doesn't mean the sand disappeared, right? That sand, in its principle, has been pulled into shallow water. It potentially could be pushed back on shore the next year. It doesn't mean it's disappeared, but it's on the beach. And then October, we have a little bit of recovery taking place at Doheny. I'm not Doheny, but at Capo Beach. So in here, we're starting to see a little bit of recovery down coast of the placement area. Okay, so that's the August to October time frame. And then I showed you earlier how the wave conditions changed in December and January. We went from the southerly wave conditions to this westerly waves that kicked in December. And as of November, December, this is in Doheny, we're still seeing more on the lines of beach loss in these areas. But if you look down the coast, we're starting to see that sediment's accumulating at Capo Beach. So in January 10th, 2024, there's like 1 to 3 feet of elevation gain just down coast of the placement area. Then there's some pockets where we see elevation drops again. And now we're going, let's see, what was it? That's November, that's Capo Beach. Okay, now we're at Capistrano Bay District, and this is quite a ways down from the placement area, but in January 10th, as of January, there was this recovery of 1 to 3 feet along basically the whole length of our study area, from Doheny Beach down to Poche Creek. All those beaches got a fresh layer of sand. And it only took less than a month for that sand just to go whoosh, right down the coastline and provide a fresh layer of coating all along those beaches. And also, we noticed that a sandbar formed all along that stretch of the coastline after the placement of that nourishment at Doheny. So with the change in the wave direction from the summer and fall southerly waves to the sort of the winter and spring westerly waves, sand got pulled off the nourishment area down into the beach face and it swept along the coastline. Sandbar was formed, beaches were widened. And these graphics here show you, as of January, what the beach face looked like with aerial imagery. The upper graphic is starting at Capo Beach Park and going south. And then the next graphic in the middle is the next segment of the coastline. And then the last one on the bottom takes you all the way down to Poche Creek. So all that coastline just got a fresh layer of beach sand in January. And it's kind of odd too, because we have this narrative that winter is when we have the worst beach erosion, right? So it just throws off like how we really think about like when sands get wide, when beaches get wider, when beaches are at their narrowest. And here's like some promising indications of recovery from a nourishment. Look at this beach offshore of Capo between September, then to January, then to April. So the material that was placed at Doheny, which was further up the coast, gets pulled into the water, gets moved by waves, gets pushed back up into some of the low spots along the coast, and it's moving around. So the sand's not going to stay in one spot. Our calculation, we did some calculations to sort of how much sand there was in the placement area over this period of time. And basically the story here is that this was the cumulative volume change in the placement area over the course of our study. And so we started off with, say, 0 change in the beginning. It went up a little bit as we finished the nourishment. And then as time went on, the volume change went down by about 35,000 cubic yards. They added 40,000. Right? They added 45,000, right? So they put 45,000 cubic yards on the top of the beach. And within 1 year, $35,000 was cubic yards in the water moving around to different beaches. So this idea that somehow like you can build a tall beach and it's all going to stay there, that's a dream. You have to fill up the low spots of the coastline. And once those get full, as Greg showed, like you need to build the whole profile. You can't just build the top of a beach and make it really steep. East Coast is fighting that all the time now. You'll read about nourishments in New Jersey and New York. We spent $500,000 on a big nourishment project, and now it's gone. Well, the problem is they've made their beaches so steep. It only takes one wave to take the sand and move it down to the low spots. So it takes a sustained commitment of many years of repeated nourishments to try to change the whole profile, and not just the part of the beach profile that sits out that we walk on and play volleyball and kick with soccer ball and all that kind of stuff. So the summary of this work was that the sand was depleted over many decades in the northern Capistrano Bight. It didn't happen overnight. And the sand depletion did coincide with land development across Orange County, and it followed the construction of Dana Point Harbor. We don't know exactly how Dana Point Harbor has changed the way sediment comes out of the river and moves down the coast. If it's somehow broken, an important link in sort of a process. I've had some conversations with people at the Army Corps about that and some others at Scripps, and it's something that seems like worthy of additional investigation. Our study showed that sand placed at the Doheny Day Use area was swept down coast with the onset of the winter waves and contributed to the recovery of beaches down coast of there over that season. Also, that the sand placed on the high berm was just pulled down into the beach face and spread around. So those are sort of the summaries of what we learned in that investigation. I just want to return to the fact that these are like our natural sources of sediment. These are the sources that, if managed well and increased, can help everybody along the coastline. I mean, which way is the sediment going in that picture of San Mateo Creek? It's making a right turn. And the sediment's heading towards the pier. So we know that San Mateo Creek will contribute sand to the littoral system along the San Clemente coast. Maybe not every storm. Maybe some storms it's going to go south. Some storms will go west. It will make some difference. I was fortunate to sort of walk out on those beaches this past winter and see how much they widened with the winter storms that we had. The beaches right there at San Mateo really widened a lot. But then these sediment that comes out of San Juan Creek, it builds up right there. Over time, does that just get pulled offshore more now, or does it go down the coast effectively? We know it goes down the coast once you're around Capo. You get to Capo Beach and it sweeps quickly, but I'm not sure how well it moves from that spot. And I've been sort of circulating and socializing this idea that a lot of the solutions to our coastal erosion problems are going to be found with what we do inland. The changing the way we design and operate dams, looking for opportunities to restore channels, flood channels, because there's like a win-win-win here. You may or may not be aware that behind Prado Dam, something like 1 million cubic yards of sediment accumulates every year. And Orange County Water District would absolutely love to share that with anybody that wants to take it. They've even been approached by foreign entities who are willing to come and take that all away for free. It's kind of a wild idea, but international market for sand places a much higher value on that than we do. They're willing to pay what it takes to go into Riverside and Corona and load up a bunch of trucks with sediment and ship it to the Long Beach Harbor and put it on a tanker and take it off to China or Indonesia or Singapore or wherever doing a big construction project. They'll pay for the sand because that's how valuable it is to them. But unfortunately, we're having trouble figuring out how do we bring sand to our beaches. And the reason there's so much demand for sand is two things. One is concrete. So these river sands are precious for concrete. They're scarce. They're global scarcity now. Desert sands are not good for concrete because the wind rounds out the grains and they're smooth and they don't make strong concrete. But these river sources of sediment are really good for concrete, and they're also good for land development projects. So if you want to grow out into the ocean, then you need sediment. So anyway, so it's a win-win. Orange County, but to their credit, Orange County Water District has resisted those requests, as far as I know, and they're trying to do what they can to manage it locally and try and find users locally to try to, do beneficial reuse of that sediment here in Southern California. But they need it out because Orange County Water District needs to do the groundwater recharge. And if Prado Dam fills up with sand, they can't store the water they need in the wintertime so that they can slowly release that water and then get it back into the groundwater basin. So there's a lot of shared interest. So we're stirring up an initiative to research the feasibility of sluicing sediment from dams to the coast and from infrastructure to inland sources, and what kind of channel restoration would be needed, channel modifications would be needed to sort of effectively sluice sediment. I've talked to the Army Corps about it. There's people there that are really interested in that, and it's a really tricky issue because you don't want to put sediment down a channel only to have it fill up a flood channel and put inland communities at risk of flooding. You don't want to put sediment in a channel that's just going to increase the maintenance costs for the County of Orange. But if we can put sediment in the channel and actually sluice 75% of it to the coast and be left with a management problem that's really no different than we have today, that'd be a win-win for coastal communities and inland communities. So this is something that I'm trying to generate interest in terms of a research initiative led by UC Irvine. And the question is, where are the opportunities? Like, where in the channel network is the best opportunity to look for restoration? Restoration projects also bring in opportunities for benefiting wildlife, flood control. There's funding available. For example, you may be aware that there's interest in restoring like southern steelhead trout habitat in South Orange County. So these are like these interests could potentially align to bring funding to do restoration, which then brings more sediment to the coast. So that's been our interest, and I'd be happy to take any questions you have.
Gentlemen, who would like to start? Steve?
Yeah, just a couple quick ones. Could you go back to the long-term trend slide? It was the colorful one that was over several decades.
Sure.
That one. So I find it interesting. In 1970, we have this huge amount of sand coming out of the harbor, and it's all piled up there. And then, but it never seems to benefit anything south of there. Where'd all the sand go?
So it's a good question. The sand is pulled from that area over time into the shallow water, and it's possible that it provided a source. It's possible that the reason those beaches south didn't collapse earlier were because this beach was being sacrificed. So it's possible that it provided like a source that then balanced out the wave push that would have ordinarily just eroded those beaches away. And you'll kind of notice that like all these beaches went from this state to the state they're in today, which is a lot of degradation after that supply ran out. So it seems as though a wide Doheny and South Doheny Beach it seems like that was a great stabilizer for the San Clemente coast for a couple of decades. Because it was really after, as Greg showed, 2015, 2016, that we really got into like the beaches crashing. Now, this is what's happening I think down at Cypress Shores is a different animal, because there you've got, the coastline really favors more up-coast transport. So, I think that area is probably much more dependent on San Mateo Creek than it is on San Juan Creek. And the question is, like, what's happening, what's affecting the supplies from San Mateo Creek? Is it just years of drought? Was it 3 or 4 decades of drought? Was there some vegetation dynamics changing that led to more sediment sort of not moving? Was that a system that used to flow more freely with less vegetation? And because the vegetation can really hold sediment in place too. It's another factor you sometimes don't think about. But in my mind, I tend to think about this problem here is like I think it was kind of like the buffer that may have stabilized the coastline for a couple of decades. And it also suggests that if there's a big regional effort to do a big nourishment, it may work out well to have targeted placement areas like that then support downcoast areas.
That's really helpful. You mentioned the OC aerial survey photos that were a big part of your study.
Mm-hmm.
What would it take to extend that down to San Mateo Point?
The aerial photos?
So you mentioned that you're using...
that's been done.
So you have it all the way down to San Mateo Point?
Yeah, we're happy to share that with you.
Oh yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, we're just gonna go down the line. Big fan. Thanks for coming by and presenting this. 2 things. I kind of wanted to get to the surf equation slide.
Oh yeah. Wow.
I'm
gonna go for the math.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, so it was the one with the actual calculation of cubic yardage, right? So theoretically, I think the next one you had a bar graph that had cubic, or no, maybe it was after all of these cross sections. It was a very black and white slide,
Oh, that bar chart?
That one. But you have a monthly cubic yard of erosion and accretion, right? So theoretically, we could take, and people of this committee and anybody that has sat on, we spend $50 a cubic yard right now, between 50 and 60, right? So you could theoretically set up a dashboard or a accounting equation that shows the actual money that is being moved or replaced on our beaches, right? Like, would that go out if you just multiply that cubic yardage by 50? You can show the city what it's losing per wave using CDIP, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, it turns out these are just measurements. These calculations are just from the DEMs that we made. So there weren't any wave modeling here. We just I think we looked at areas where the sediment volume got higher. So we kind of month to month changes to the height get higher by how much. So we added up areas where the volume got higher, and we got added up volumes where the volume got smaller, and we kind of compared those side by side. And then since we're looking on this side, so basically there was one month because of the nourishment we were adding sand that much, but then all these months the volume of sand in the placement area was going down, just based on like the area under the curve in terms of the digital elevation model that we created with the drone data.
but it gives the city and it gives the residents a actual financial number to kind of understand what is happening to their beaches, right? And that's, I think, kind of what our committee is trying to do, is trying to translate a lot of this scientific data into actionable, like what fiscal budgets and things like that, and what we need to sustain the beach.
Yeah, you can be creative with data for sure. So I guess we've also, I mean, as an aside, we've also taken an interest in, in who's using the beach, the beneficiaries of the beach. How many people are coming to the beach? Where are they coming from? What are they doing? That kind of stuff. I think that's another part of the story of trying to understand the.
And in protection of assets, right? Yeah. Because the beach is like a levee to storms. So theoretically that's possible to create
multiply by $50 and then you guys remember
over the years. Well, and hopefully we can get sand for cheaper, like from Chipton and things like that. But right now I think it's averaging out to between 50 and 60.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So just a quick point of reference, it seems like shorter wave period is erosional versus the longer period, because in that after January there was a bunch of long period west swells right at New Year's. I remember vividly, like that was the New Year's swells of like 18-second northwest.
Yeah, it seems as though that these shorter period waves do sort of crash on the beach and chop a lot of sand away. And the longer period waves tend to be more of a flood risk. Okay. Because the longer period waves can really have much higher run up than what you'd see like in a shorter period wave. So think of like big long period waves as high flood risk, and these shorter waves as like high erosion risk.
Okay, that's good. And then last thing. So I know that you had drone data of the Capistrano Bight. In there's got to be some sort of geostationary satellite that visits the bight on a daily or weekly or some sort of monthly basis. Like, would it be possible to get a time series of the bight over the past 2 years?
We've already done it for the past 40 years.
Okay, so because I think that like showing that visual, and especially in the past year that we've had all these different types of replenishments, right? Like just that time series visual for the city to show its residents would be a very powerful.
Yeah, I'd be happy to share that with you.
Yeah, exactly.
I had Leslie invited me graciously to come give a talk, and I thought I could do 2 talks. I could do the satellite talk, or I could do the drone talk. And I did the drone talk today.
No, the drone talk today.
But yeah, so we have satellite data that goes back to like 1985. And it's you get kind of you were getting around once every couple weeks back then, but now we're getting like at least once a week, something like that. And it's showing beach width. We don't get elevation, we get beach width. And,
No, but you just have an image, like a colored image of how that, even just showing how the Army Corps project is widening
That's right,
that beach over time would be very interesting.
I agree.
To me.
Yeah, we haven't
personally.
refreshed our data set since the core project went in, so I agree that would be a really great addition.
Cool. Sorry, last one too, because you talked about dams. So in Southern California, we have Prado and we have Matilla.
Uh-huh.
Are there any other sources that are like actively filling up with sediment?
Yeah, those are the big ones, but there's a lot of debris basins and check dams and things like that that are designed just to hold sediment in place in different areas. So I actually have a new undergraduate student who came and was interested in getting involved in research, and I've started him creating a sort of a GIS layer of all the channels and infrastructure in Orange County. So I want to classifying all the channels. So which one's armored, which one's soft, where are the hydraulic structures, and so we'll have that covering San Clemente. And the idea is that we want to look at what does it take to sluice sediment, but where are also the potential bottlenecks that might. And where's the mining taking place? We know that there's been mining of sand in Orange County. There still is a mine. Whether that's impacting sand delivery to the coast, I don't know.
And is that Ortega or?
Yeah, it's in the San Juan Creek watershed.
Okay. All right, that's it. Sorry, I took up enough time. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the good question.
Both of you have great questions. Let's move along to this side.
Well, first of all, thank you, Dr. Sanders, for being here, and thank you we're very fortunate to have you and the work that you do for Orange County. I have a question on, you mentioned San Mateo Creek, and my observation's been that flows out very infrequently. In fact, I think the last time it did was this March 2023. I was very hopeful that actually that would have delivered a lot more sediment, because I think it probably was 5 years before that had actually broken through prior. And it seemed even before that, it was almost an every 4 or 5 year event at most. It did seem to deliver some sediment right around the mouth, but very little to more than 100 yards north or south of that, because Lower Trestle still very eroded. Cotton's Point obviously still very eroded. Right around the mouth did seem to get quite a bit of sand. Any other thoughts on why that was not a more substantial sediment delivery opportunity?
Well, I'm just fascinated to hear your observations, because I don't have a sensor there. I don't have data to sort of to tell us how that's changed. I mean, your suggestions that maybe it blew out more frequently in the past than it's going.
Well, I think it's been 5 years, and I think probably it was another 5 years prior to that. I don't know anything before that. I do know that the Department of Waterways actually has a flow monitor for that creek, and that would probably be a very good indicator of when that did blow out over time.
Certainly the flow rate, yeah.
Well, and so just on that, like where the creek blew out is also very important. Like in '97, after the El Nino, it created the lowers left a lot. Like it blew out at lowers instead of at uppers, and so this wasn't the Camp Pendleton, which I think is still part of San Mateo Creek, that little Camp Pendleton area. But so this one blew straight out, right? And normally it blows out into the uppers basin or out into the uppers bay. Like it bends out into the bay. And so I think going back to the meandering of the LA River is the big one, and you see it in any big river. Like the Mississippi is obviously a huge one too, but like where that blows out determines where that sand is stored.
So I think we don't have enough data to say, but I thought it was encouraging that we did see the supply this year, and I think I'd also heard reports just of the sort of the sandbars that were present north of San Mateo Point, that there were changes to the wave breaks in that area because of the sandbars that had formed. So there's indications that the sand's heading in the upcoast direction, but it may also be one of those things where like the tank was dry, and so one little fill-up gets you part way there, but it may take more wet winters before it kind of comes back to something that resembles what had been more recently.
I guess that brings me into a general question regarding sand replenishment. We obviously have a lot of sand replenishment projects happening and in the works.
Yeah.
And how do you look at these intermittent projects where you put sand on the beach? Does that just kind of maintain part? Is there some, would it be great if we could somehow just add 1 million? Is there some amount of sand that we could get on the beach and would kind of return us to a certain equilibrium, and then it would just be a maintenance function?
That's a great question. I've been thinking about that because, like Greg shared some numbers of like 40,000 cubic yards a year from San Juan Creek, and I'd seen some numbers of like maybe 70,000 cubic yards per year from San Juan Creek, and maybe 30 on average from San Mateo Creek. So we could say like maybe this coastline needs around 100,000 cubic yards a year. Maybe that's what like would be an equilibrium. You say, where could you get that, right? That's kind of encouraging that the County of Orange was able to get 50,000 there for 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
What if that's half the problem solved? You've got, but that's only the steady state, and you've got an empty tank. So maybe you need to put a lot more in up front, and maybe the Army Corps project is going to help with that. So I'm kind of encouraged that the region's made a big investment in adding quite a bit more relative to what an annual budget of sand might look like, and it, maybe there's reason to be somewhat optimistic for the next few decades before rates of sea level rise get so high that it becomes a much more difficult battle to fight. But it seems like through 2050, the rates of sea level rise are still somewhat similar to what we have today. But that's a question, right? And I think that with the amount that's gone in this year, and then we're hearing commitments from OCTA to do more. If we could repeat some of these flood control channel projects, and we started some thinking too about other ways to get sediment from inland sources to the coast. You may be aware that there are slurry pipelines in some areas so you could dig up your streets and put in a slurry pipeline if you knew there was some reliable source somewhere inland, and that could potentially, over the long run, be way more cost effective than diesel trucks, and you wouldn't have an air quality permit to deal with and all these other things. So there's other things you could be thinking about.
That's great advice for our subcommittee. Thank you so much.
I have one last question. You showed the depiction of how wave action changed once Dana Point Harbor was put in place, and how that could change the sand movement dynamic. And I'm just wondering, it looked, at least how I saw that dynamic, was that it instead of pushing it historically as it did southward, that is more just on and off coast. Is there potentially a sand repository just off?
This is a question I had. Yeah, and so I haven't. The Army Corps is doing a study where they're digging out sand from inside the harbor, and they're gonna do a nearshore placement. Have you heard about this?
Just to dredge the harbor. Is that?
It's another some smallish project, like maybe 40,000 cubic yards, something like that, right? So they're gonna place that material. Originally they were gonna place it out here somewhere, but I think they've agreed to place it closer here, so it picks up. In theory, it should potentially be picked up by the waves and pushed back on shore. But yes, but I asked those guys. I said, did you guys do like a detailed model and figure out like? They're like, no, we just kind of do this back of the envelope thing. I said, so it seems like this we don't know enough. Because I am concerned because I'm really interested in restoring some of these natural processes of rivers, and I think there's a lot of benefits that could come to inland communities from having channels that aren't concrete ditches. You imagine like natural systems, better water quality, better water conservation, more recreational features for inland communities to benefit from. So a potential win-win-win, but if we do all this work to have more sediment coming down rivers and it just shoots offshore like a jet, then that's not going to be a good investment, for at least for the coast. So I'd be curious to learn more about that. I don't have the answers,
You
unfortunately.
have to put your heads together. John, do you have the question?
Yes, I do. Following a winter storm, you said that a sandbar forms in the nearshore environment. Does that then provide protection from future storms, causing the waves to break further out and reduce the erosion?
Sounds like you've read the textbook on coastal engineering. Yeah.
No, but it seems like
Yeah, absolutely.
People think of it as just being lost, but
Yeah.
it actually does provide a benefit, right?
You know, beaches have this innate cool function that if you have a wide sandy beach, say that's formed during mild waves, and the big waves come and they pull sand offshore and they create a bar. What's beautiful is that forces the waves to break offshore, as you just said, and that means their energy is dissipated offshore. And so by the time those waves make it onto the beach, they're less erosive, less damaging, less likely to damage property and everything else. So when you've got sand in the system, you've got your really intelligent beach defense system at work. You've got sand that can kind of go offshore, create a mound, dissipate wave energy offshore, and so the impacts to the coastline are lessened. And the beaches will do that naturally. The small waves will tend to push the sand back onshore and make the beach wider. The big waves will tend to be pulling sand offshore, and the formation of that bar is really effective at coastal protection.
Yeah, given the high cost of getting sand and transporting it, do you think the Sacramento would have a legal case towards asking whoever's responsible for Dana Point Harbor to contribute to some of these sand replenishment?
I'll have to land on one of my law school colleagues to answer that question. Yeah. So the thing is, we can't yet establish exactly how the harbor changed the movement of sand. So there's a lot of ambiguity there that I think if you were going to go into some sort of legal proceedings, it's a tough case to make. But so I wouldn't want to. I think it is. But I think just in the interest of knowing, how's the sand moving, and have we somehow damaged an important natural function that we need to to sort of meet the needs of the coastline? It's definitely worth investigating.
Okay, thank you.
Rick, it's time for you.
I just had one comment. Susan and I both sat in on a webinar that was presented by Dr. Henke from USC, Tempe School of Engineering, and he described beaches as a line of defense.
Yeah.
And he says the public doesn't perceive them, but they truly are. So he also pointed out some bad news. He said we're losing about 1.4 meters per year of our coastline. This is mostly Southern California. By the year 2050, it's going to be 2.12 meters per year. So the coastline is moving in. So it kind of puts a gray cloud over all the idea of bringing beaches in, if in fact the coastline is retreating generally from population increase. I think one of the things that he pointed out is just the volume of people here and the use of the coast. So the long-term effects are. My question, that's just a comment.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in what this graduate student is studying. Is there an endpoint to that, or is that just trying to pure research, or is there a goal to determine some causes for why these watersheds are not producing the kind of runoff that they used to? Where is that going? Where is that?
Yeah. So, what I see is that we're always reinvesting in infrastructure. It's something that we do as a nation. We have to repair our roads, we have to repair our waterways, we have to rebuild bridges. So the question is, in the future, what's the recipe for rebuilding our waterways? What should be our design strategy? I don't think we have one right now. We have a design strategy that's 100 years old, which was that we should block the sediment when it comes out of the mountains, and then we should design these racetracks that take water from the foot of the mountains to the coast. That was the recipe that we used in Southern California, and it was good for economic growth, right? It was It provided safety to the public, so it served what people wanted 100 years ago. But now we want something different. I think we realize, well, gosh, we want to have beaches. We have to conserve water. We can't rely on water from Owens Valley and the Colorado water, Colorado River. So we need to capture more of our own water here in Southern California. We need to store it in the ground. We need better water quality. We need to have better habitat in our streams for birds and fish. And if we kill off all our fish, we're not going to have any food to eat. So these are things we're starting to realize that we gotta so we need a new design. That's what I want to do. I want to come up with what is that new recipe for infrastructure in Southern California that's good for the coast and it offers some benefits for flood protection and other benefits for inland communities, and it's good for water quality. And so that's kind of my interest. And I think once we get that big picture, then there's millions of practical applications that would follow, and obviously all sorts of complications that come on a site-by-site basis from unique site conditions and everything else. But that's kind of where our research group is sort of interested now.
That's a kind of a broadly geographically based frame of thought. And there's a dam up the Ventura River up in Ojai called the Matilda Dam, which is completely silted in. And they want to knock that thing down and restore that watershed, which will improve the surf all the way down to Oxnard, maybe as far. They knocked out a river up on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington, where I was last week, and it's improved the watershed tremendously. So I think there are no dams that I know of that we can knock out on the San Mateo River. But I'm a huge fan of that, and I think we should be cognizant of if we improve the upstream, where that water goes, it's going to help our replacement sand on the beach. So
that's the hope, and it might not be like that. There's some massive dam that needs to be. There might be a sort of just a design practice. It might be the type of culverts we use, or maybe it's the way bridge crossings are engineered, or something like that turns out is contributing a lot to the trapping of sediment. Or we don't know what that is yet. So we're gonna.
What you're looking at?
Yeah, that's the idea.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for coming and enlightening us. And you can see the brains up here that are working hard and coming at you with things as you're thinking of yourself.
Yeah.
And that's what we run into. Just a slight example here with over the weekend with the king tides. And we put all that sand in North Beach. And everybody's saying, oh, North Beach is going to wash away again. And pretty much part of that was true, because I was out there talking to various people, and all of a sudden 2 men came up and said, you're going to lose your bathroom at North Beach already, and what are you thinking of? And so I walked down there, and sure enough, the whole north side had been probably 50% eaten away. And I'm wondering if scientists have thought about, to protect the infrastructure, by weighting down the sand a bit. And so it would not be called to the ocean. It would be sitting there, protecting the buildings and the infrastructure.
Well, that is why the people that design nourishment projects, they favor heavier sand. They favor so larger grains and whatnot. But keep in mind that beaches don't want to be steep.
No.
So if we design these nourishment projects that build steep beaches, it's never going to stay steep.
No. Right.
But if we invest in the whole cell, if we build up the whole cell and realize that there's going to be waves are going to rework things, but eventually we want to invest in the region, and the region as a whole will sort of benefit. I think you're on the right track.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, again, I think that all the gentlemen up here with me have great ideas, and maybe we could call on you and have some kind of seminar to do some brainstorming.
Be happy to. In fact, Mayor Cabral visited UCI this summer, and we chatted about possible collaborations and so on. And so we're really delighted to try to support you and interact with you, and look forward to that.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dr. Sims.
Alrighty. We are moving on to Jamie Timberlake, who has been so patient. We're looking so much forward to hear you and your program. Thank you, Jamie.
I'd say if
if you didn't do anything at North Beach, what would the bathrooms look like now? Yeah, I'm a former Triton, so I know San Clemente pretty well. And I'm really stoked to be here tonight, and I'm very tired, so forgive me if I'm a little bit unpolished tonight. We had a big council meeting last night, so I was doing a public meeting last night and doing some press this morning. It's been a fun day. So good evening, my name is Jamie Timberlake, and I'm the Coastal Zone Administrator for the City of Oceanside. And today I've been asked to give you an update on the Reed Beach Oceanside project, which is our coastal resilience initiative that looks to use an innovative coastal management technique to construct and restore Reed Beach, our oceanside shoreline. So I'll run through the background on this initiative fairly quickly so we can get into the design. And also I added a couple slides of the Gold Coast just to show you kind of where our design comes from and what it looks like there. And then I'll give you a couple of next steps for our project. And feel free to interrupt if you have a question. I don't mind that. Let's see, let me just get my computer going in the right spot. Okay, so Reed Beach really began in 2020 with the city's recognition that the shoreline was losing sand at a rapid pace, and also that the long-promised fix from the federal government was unlikely to come before our shoreline was completely lost. So in 2020, the city set out to determine what were the main causes of coastal erosion and also what we could do at the city level that would proactively maintain our sandy shoreline. So the beach sand feasibility study was a year-long investigation, and it came to some high-level conclusions, which are really the backbone to Reed Beach Oceanside. The feasibility study recommended that a high-quality source of sand be identified and a beach nourishment program developed to provide a more consistent sand source, which is all what we're talking about tonight. And the beach nourishment program should be combined with a retention mechanism that could assist with retaining sand, since all of our coastal frontiers data shows that sand leaves our shoreline fairly quickly. So in August 2021, the City Council gave staff direction to pursue the recommendations given in the feasibility study. Specifically, staff was directed to move forward with the environmental analysis, design, and permitting of a pilot project that would aim for both beach nourishment and sand retention. And then in 2023, the City Council approved a contract with GHD for the sand nourishment and retention pilot project. So as part of the design and engineering tasks of the sand nourishment and retention pilot project, you can see why we call it Reed Beach now, because that's a long one, the city and its partners decided to launch an international design competition to see what kinds of beach erosion solutions were out there in the world that were already being tested in areas that were experiencing similar coastal stress. So the eight-month-long final design competition hosted 3 competitors, which came from New York City, from the Netherlands, and from the Gold Coast of Australia. The competitors were given the parameters for competition, which were in alignment with the recommended conclusions from the feasibility study. And this is how they competed. They were given these objectives, which was to design a sand retention feature that would restore and maintain sand while providing additional benefits to the community, and increase the efficiency and extend the benefits of any and all sand nourishment efforts that the city, the region, or the federal government carry forward.
Were there dollar figures associated with that when they were asked to submit a design?
Were there dollar figures for the, yes. So we said, I think it was 20 million, around there. That's what the goal should be for your design. Great question.
Could I interfere?
Sure.
I think that with our time, et cetera, if you would hold off your questions to the end.
Sorry.
No, you don't have to do so. I
That's
think
my
we would go
fault.
smoother and quicker. Thank you so much.
Okay, so throughout the competition, but write them down, don't forget those questions. Throughout the competition, the design rounds, we had 3 design rounds, and at each end of the design round, we had a public workshop. We had stellar attendance at every public workshop, 150 to 220 people per workshop. The public comments that we gathered at these workshops, they really informed the designs, because we had some crazy designs in the beginning. So the public came out and said what they did and did not like about the designs, and then the competitors changed the designs accordingly. And then we captured a lot of comments from the community to really understand what they wanted, which was once we do this retention feature, of course they want to maintain surfability. It's a big deal in Oceanside, just like it is in San Clemente. They want to maintain beach safety, because beach safety can be an issue as you're adding structures to the shoreline. They create rips sometimes, so it's top of mind for the community. And then of course the preservation of lateral access along the coast. So key components of the competition included the creation of a jury and advisory panel, and setting up these robust design criteria to guide the competitors. We organized the jury very, very early in this, and the jury was comprised of 15 voting and non-voting community advocates and regional experts that worked in an advisory role throughout the competition, with the voting members actually voting on the winning team. The jury included representatives from the local surf community, advocates for sustainable sand management, State Oceanside Sand, current and former staff from the Coastal Commission, regional representation from coastal cities to the south, and amongst others. So once the jury was formed, we collaboratively created the design criteria as the backbone for both guiding and judging the competition. And then those criteria were things like physical performance, cost, and impacts to adjacent beaches. So after the final design round and the third public workshop, the Living Speed Bumps design concept prevailed as the winner of the design competition, which was certified with a unanimous council approval in January 2024. The Living Speed Bumps design was brought forward by International Coastal Management from the Gold Coast of Australia. And this design really embodies 3 retention constructs coupled with beach nourishment. Two of the constructs are located on the back beach, and they act as headlands, like Dana Point, shown here as item A. And this will help stabilize the dry sand beach space. These headlands are expected to extend out at grade approximately 150 to 200 feet off the back beach, and they're supported by a very rock toe. And in the offshore areas shown in item B is an artificial reef, which is constructed and placed in roughly 900 feet 900 feet offshore in roughly 20 to 40 feet of water. This reef will provide some energy dissipation, which will encourage development of sandbars in the lee and sides of the structure, and both of these elements are supplemented with nourishment both on the beach and in the nearshore area. And the reason for all of the nourishment is really because we're not trying to severely interrupt the sediment transport here. We're trying to prolong sand management activities, which are forever in Oceanside. We will have to do this forever, as I assume you will as well in San Clemente. The 2 headlands, the artificial reef, and the beach nourishment are all the entirety of the pilot project. So right now we're currently estimating that we need approximately 900,000 cubic yards of material to supplement the retention constructs. We're in a severely eroded state south of the pier, so we need a large amount to bring back some semblance of a beach. Right now we expect to maintain the sandy beaches with 250 to 300,000 cubic yards of material every 5 years after we construct. And this could be subject to change because we are going to be doing modeling, extensive modeling coming up pretty soon here. This is a photo of harbor dredging sand placement, which happens every year, but this doesn't really provide us with enough sand to keep pace with our erosion. And also it's very fine grained, so we want to find a better source of supplemental sand here, and we recently completed our own sand source investigation offshore, which will allow us to have more readily accessible sand that is cheaper to move around, could possibly even use a different type of dredge. So additionally, we're discussing a sand distribution system, which is something that has also been piloted on the Gold Coast of Australia, and I think Bring Back Our Beaches put something out there recently about the Tweed River bypass system. We may not be able to actually have a standing bypass system, but we could have a pipeline that would either be buried or go along the strand or be buried underneath the strand to kind of turn off, turn on the sand when we need it, when we have a source. That's to be determined though. So these are, pretty crass at this point because we haven't done a whole lot of modeling or refinement in the design. So these are just the concept design dimensions. Just want to make sure I put that out there. These are definitely subject to change. But the two headlands are designed to be rounded so that the back beach sand, once it accumulates, it can more easily move around the structure rather than a groin, which is really, sand will move around a groin, but it has to fully fill it out all the way before that happens. And so these are designed to be rounded, the rounded part of it is part of the design. And in Oceanside, we have a similar sediment transport where it goes both north and south, depending on the season. We're pretty exposed to swell direction from everywhere, so that is definitely holding true, and we see it, and we have now some data to back that up. The kind of the rock outcropping, that is because on the top of the headland, we're hoping to do like a park, like have there be multiple amenities available, maybe just some picnic space or some barbecue space, but we don't want to be disturbing the park so much, but we do want to make sure that our novel sand retention project does retain some sand, so that rocky outcrop is expected to be and give us an ability to adapt our design, because we'll be doing a lot of monitoring to see how it works, and then a lot of adjustments to see to make sure we're hitting all of our performance standards. So the reef is made of various sizes of quarry rock. It's ranging from smaller rocks at the core to more 8-ton rocks at the crest. And thus far, we expect the reef to be pretty large, and like I said, placed at a depth of probably 20 to 40 feet. Placing the reef at this depth doesn't stop wave action like a breakwater, but it dissipates the energy so that the waves aren't directly attacking the shoreline. And with the headlands having that rounded feature to allow for sand migration and the reef allowing waves to move over top, you can see how this design really does act like a speed bump to the erosive forces at work in Oceanside. So the living speed bumps concept largely mimics the Palm Beach artificial reef, which is on the Gold Coast of Australia. Palm Beach is part of the Gold Coast. It's chronically experienced beach erosion, usually from high wave energy events or cyclones. For many years, the Gold Coast implemented measures just like we all do, which is grabbing sand from offshore, using beach nourishment, or using sand beneficially from removing it from a channel or from a harbor. But again, those kind of attacking forces and how close Palm Beach was built out to the water, they began to start to see the need that they needed to get a little more creative. So they started installing artificial reefs. So I'll highlight just this one of several artificial reefs that have been deployed in Australia. This one is the Palm Beach Shoreline Project. So Palm Beach, long history of erosion, kind of looks like Oceanside, fronted with a lot of riprap that was definitely exposed. The Palm Beach Shoreline Project actually mimics another artificial reef that was constructed on the Gold Coast in Surfers Paradise. And though the designs are really different, the overarching concept is the same, which is to dissipate wave energy with a reef, lessen the effects of nearshore currents by stabilizing the back beach with headlands or short groins, as they have here, and then maintain beach volume and elevation gains with dunes, and then monitor and manage the shoreline. That's a key. So for the piloted project in Palm Beach in the city of Gold Coast, the result has been sustained increase in beach width and an increase in biodiversity and marine life around the structure. And they've had the reef installed for 5 years now and seen all these, all their performance standards met. Yeah, it's really cool. And I got to check it out and surf it. So back to Oceanside. Oceanside is piloting the project in one location where it can be performed to the highest level and be a proof of concept for the rest of the city and perhaps for San Clemente or for other places on the Highway of Energy coast. So the idea is that we locate the project in an optimum location and then monitor and assess its performance, and if it performs well and hits performance standards, then the project could be scaled up to additional areas in Oceanside. So over the past 5 months, we've been doing an extensive siting analysis because, as you might imagine, it's really important to be very thorough in making the decision of where to put the pilot project. So to begin our siting assessment, we divided the most eroded areas of the coast into segments based on natural breaks in the coastline. And these are the 3 segments, with segment 1 extending from Seagaze to Wisconsin Avenue, so basically along the Strand in Oceanside. Segment 2 extending from Wisconsin to North Buccaneer, which is north of Loma Alta Creek. And segment 3 extending from Buccaneer Beach to Buena Vista Lagoon, which is the border with Carlsbad. So next, we amassed all the factors or the criteria that needed to be evaluated to enable project implementation. So we first aggregated all these criteria with the project team, and then we opened the discussion up to the rest of the city departments, and included Public Works, Planning, Engineering, Marine Safety, Parks and Rec, and the City Manager's Office. And then the project team analyzed the various layouts for the headlands and the reef in each one of the segments. We tried to make this as objective as possible, so we scored the amassed criteria with several different layouts per segment, and these are the recommended layouts of the reef and headland per segment, which were the highest scoring configurations of the pilot project elements. And then we conducted several months of public outreach to ask the public for feedback on the siting analysis process and the criteria being assessed to make the siting decision. We tried not to ask which segment would you like this in, because everyone has a different answer and everyone has a very emotional answer. So we really tried hard to make this as objective as possible so that we could really showcase the performance of the project. And then finally, we scored all of them, all the criteria for each of the recommended layouts, and that's how we got to our conclusion. These are the criteria. I will not go, oops, sorry. These are the criteria. I will not go through every one of them, but I can highlight a couple. So, like the property risk assessment criteria assesses the risks and uncertainties associated with doing a pilot project and the negative effects that it could have on the shoreline. This was a really important one because in segment 1, it was primarily public infrastructure and public roads adjacent to where the headlands will come out from. But in segment 2 and 3, there's a lot of private property, and so we really wanted to make sure to score that adequately because we can't assume that all private residents that are adjacent to these headlands would be okay with piloting a new project in their backyard. And then we also had other things that we really need to look at, like adaptive management. We needed to be able to have long-term access to the sites, to be able to change the design elements if our monitoring program shows that we're having negative effects. And then, of course, we assess surf resources. So we wanted to see what assess the surf, make sure that we're putting it in a location that is not going to have a negative impact, but we needed to be able to compare each of the scores per segment, per criteria, and be able to kind of see how the surf resources could potentially be affected in each one of the layouts and segments. Pretty long, arduous siting analysis, but we did get through it. And when we assessed each of the criteria for the recommended layouts per segment, segment 1 scores the highest with 91% of the total points that could be given. So segment 1 is the recommended and now approved location for the Reed Beach Oceanside pilot project, just got approved last night. So with the headlands, they would be constructed at Tyson Street Park and at Wisconsin Avenue. And then the offshore reef is constructed offshore, situated between the two headlands. And then here's a visualization of the chevron-shaped reef with the headlands and our successful stable beach in segment 1. So yesterday council decided on the pilot project location, which really helps us get going on the engineering and design tasks. We've already done some numerical modeling, but now that we have that location, we'll be focusing our numerical modeling on the location and on using all the shoreline conditions that we've been studying for the last couple of years. And then that model that we're proposing to use will help us answer questions about the sand quantities that are needed and the reef headland design, like the crest elevation of the reef, the orientation of the reef, size and shape, and then the ideal location of the reef between the headlands. And then over the past summer, like I mentioned, we wrapped up our offshore sediment investigations and reporting. We require a lot of sand for this project, and we now have a designated area that we're going to be grabbing that sand from. We'll be using that sand for initial construction and for adapting the project. So if we're starting to see impacts on one side of the structures, then we'll be using that source of sand that's nearby to the project site to supplement those areas. So really, we're using it as an adaptive management tool. We continue to conduct physical monitoring of the beaches, the latest of which showed accretion of sand. And I believe that's really because we're in a La Nina period and we had kind of a really horrible surf season over the summer, at least in Oceanside we did. And so we had a lot of beaches get restored just because that wave action was pretty minimal. And then, we have a lot of work to do on fundraising between now and the end of this contract, but we are aiming for project implementation as early as 2027. And I'm here for questions.
Wonderful. Who would like to start?
You can start on that side this time.
Okay.
You answered my one question, which is where it is in terms of process.
Okay.
And you answered my other question, which is about costs, and obviously you take it in not just cost, but impacted costs and impacts on cost and property value. So my one question is, it didn't seem like you brought into as much this presentation of bringing in new sand or dredging. You also have a big source of river of water from the San Gorgonio River, that was called?
San Luis Rey, yeah.
Yeah, has that been flowing as much as poorly as the rivers up here have been, or is that still a good source of new sand for Oceanside?
It's a horrible source of sand.
Why?
Unfortunately. San Luis Rey is a perennial river, so it does flow all year round, but we do have levees along it, and we do have an Army Corps restoration project, flood control project, that's been working for the last 70 years to get that working. It has not happened yet. And so, yeah, we're still struggling to get that project working. But kind of as Brett mentioned, what's happened is it's a very natural river, and so there's a lot of habitat in there. So there's a lot of need to maintain and not have major impacts, but that habitat causes a lot of sediment to get stuck in the river. There's also, when you come down to Oceanside, you take a look at the river, there's some confinements to the river, and that's from an old road bed. That's an old road that used to cross at grade to that South Jetty parking lot. And with that road base still remaining, there's constrictions on the amount of flow. So sometimes actually when we have south swells and we get sediment transport to the north, that sediment transport goes into the San Luis Rey River mouth and gets stuck behind that old road.
So you're
So-
pulling sand from offshore your own beaches then? You're dredging from within your own littoral flow then to bring it back onto the beach for your sand replacement?
So for this project, we're going to be looking at a lot of different sources. We're going to be hoping for the Sandag project to get going. We also, like I said, we have now an approval for a borrow area offshore of Oceanside. We have scoop permits. We have all those mechanisms of getting sand to the beach. But we'll be tapping into all those different things to get the sand that's needed to supplement the constructs here. Then we annually dredge the harbor, but that's really a navigation project. It's an operations and maintenance project. So the Army Corps does that. We beneficially reuse the material on our beaches, but it's really an Army Corps navigation-driven project. So we don't always have control over where that sand gets placed, but we encourage them to place it where we like it. But it is it's not a city-led effort, that one. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was wondering what the advantage is for the reef that has a chevron shape. How does that physically work? Is that designed to break the wave energy at the apex of the V and then to roll off waves both directions? Or?
So this isn't quite designed to be a surf break. We're designing it for sand retention. We hope there are additional benefits that include being able to surf off the reef occasionally, maybe a really big swell. If you're familiar with like Cardiff area, Seaside Reef, it's kind of an offshore, deeper reef, and sometimes you can surf off of it. Well, you surf off of that, goes into deeper water, and then on the inside, sand accumulates inside of that reef. That's a natural reef, but it's going to likely work in that same way, where the water will overtop the reef, and it could possibly create a surf space, an extra surf space out there, but really we're designing the reef to be for maintaining sandbars and sand on the beach.
So after it's installed, you expect the sand to kind of flow in from the side and accrete in between the two arms essentially, and then continue to create landward. Is that the plan, or?
Well, we don't know if we're going to keep the chevron shape for one. So we don't have enough information at this point. We're just getting into numerical modeling and how we're going to shape and at what depth we're going to put the reef and what the shape will look like, what the material will look like, how much water above the reef there will be. That's all to be determined.
I see. And where's all the money coming from to build the entire project?
We're going to be cobbling money together from different places. So different grants, state grants, federal grants, potentially private funders. We're looking into philanthropic interests. We have a Measure X that passed. It's beach restoration. It has beach restoration within that, but it's not a designated funding source. So to be determined on that too. It's got a long way to go on the funding.
Was Measure X a increase in tax, local tax, similar to what St. Clair voted on recently?
It was a continuation of an increase to sales tax, but like I said, it kind of incorporates a lot of other elements of assisting the city, so not just a focused fund. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
You said your borrow site study did identify a new site and it's since been permitted?
Yes, we've been approved.
Okay. And where is that site?
It's south of the pier. Yeah, offshore.
Is it the same site that San Clemente was going to use initially for our sand replenishment?
No, that one is north, that's SO2, it's north of the harbor, just a little bit, and to the west. And so yeah, this one is, it had never been investigated before, and so we did a similar deployment of, kind of an assessment with maps, and then went out and did cores, and we did that all last summer, so we've gone through the dredge management materials team and been approved.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jill?
Yeah, no, thank you for the presentation. So just to, sorry, I forgot to click my mic on. Thanks again for the presentation. Just to confirm, the reef part is submergent, fully submergent all the time.
That's the idea right now. Yeah. That's the concept.
Okay.
And on the Gold Coast, let me see if I can go back to that. On the Gold Coast, that's how their reef is, and because we have this design competition, we have the Gold Coast International Coastal Management team on our team. So they're kind of helping guide. You can see the Palm Beach Artificial Reef in the left picture there. So that one isn't actually chevron shaped. So yeah, like I said, to be determined on the shape. But yeah, it's going to be designed similarly to the Palm Beach Artificial Reef, just submerged. And when I surfed it, it was very similar to surfing seaside in Cardiff. Like I said, kind of waves wash over it. You catch the wave on the side of it. It goes into deeper water, but then there's an accumulation of sand on the inside.
Okay, that was it.
Okay.
Nothing from me. Great presentation. Congratulations on the progress. And really looking forward to seeing what happens over the coming years.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Jamie, we thank you so much for coming. We've been anticipating this for some time, and it's so good to see you and to see what you've come up with. Oh gosh, the Coastal Zone Administrator. You've got a lot on your hands, as Leslie knows as well, but thank you so much for taking the time, especially since you had a very busy week thus far.
No
It
problem.
really means a lot to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Alrighty. We're moving on to oral communications. Are there any cards? Miley, do we have any
I think
cards?
they're right up here.
They're ready for me.
Oh. Okay, thank you. I think my arms are that, oh, thank you. Ah, Amanda?
We had such wonderful, great experts in the field speaking tonight, and it's really great to have been here to listen to that. And Jamie Timberlake had mentioned the Palm Beach submerged breakwater, which was part of the example for our nature-based coastal resiliency study. But in that study for the city of San Clemente that they did, it was emergent versus underneath the water. So that was great to listen to that. It was great listening to Professor Sanders mention confirming what the South Orange County Regional Coastal Resiliency Strategic Plan has stated about the sand depletion, which was as a result of of land development, and it's unfortunate that we had that. And as a resident of San Clemente for over 50 years, I've definitely seen the problems through the harbor, but it was great to see that as a result of the harbor, it did supply sand to our beaches in the 60s, 70s, and so that was something, a positive in that way. However, I know he had mentioned to that the amount of sand replenishment that was done at Doheny recently, and as a result of Hurricane Hillary, with those shortwave action, it did move sand towards that. But unless if we didn't have that sand replenishment, that would not have occurred. So one of the things that I also wanted to mention is that Professor Sanders had mentioned DOCTA, and that's something that I've been really a proponent of because I've seen them be our city's representative, our ally, and our friend throughout the years, especially being a strong advocate going against the TCA, basically telling them to stay in their lanes regarding toll roads. However, their motto is promises made, promises kept, and in their initial technical memorandum, they had included sand replenishment already in that page 4 from the beginning. And it's unfortunately that a false narrative development that they developed that they weren't going to help us. However, it was Supervisor Foley who said in the letter that she included at the August 6th meeting that they had applied for $460 million worth of grants, and $70 to $145 million were going to go to our beaches. So I think that's a positive, and it goes to show that they do keep their promises. Thank you very much.
Thank you. George Goodwin.
Hello.
Hi, George.
It's still going to take a huge amount of money. I think we should build a harbor that'll trap sand between Dana and the new harbor. That'll create the income to replenish our beaches south of the harbor. One of the ways we'd come up with the material and stuff to build revetments or our harbor would be to fix the 5. To fix the 5, the quickest way to fix the 5 is to get people off the 5. We need a tunnel underneath Ortega, let's face it, because everybody's got to go all the way to 55, all the way down to 76. Not many people go over the top of Ortega Highway. The things it'll do for marine safety is amazing. I was out there drowning the other day and the lifeguard yelled back, "I'll be back in about an hour, the boat's in Dana." So that didn't help me much. Some great experts and stuff today, but I'd love to comment about the dollars in the waves. A couple dollars in the waves, dollar signs, and a lot of dollar signs in certain conditions. So one of the things I see as a businessman is I see a hell of an opportunity to cut that cost of sand in half by harvesting it. I don't know if we can sluice it down the creek. That would be great. That would be inexpensive and great. But I think it would be a capital project that would be too expensive. I think we're going to have to shuttle it. I think we're going to have to shuttle it with trains. And that's something that attracts me because the train company just does it. Let's hit Berkshire Hathaway. Let's write them a mean, nasty letter, say we're going to have 10,000 kids with sandy feet, sticky fingers, and kazoos show up at your office. You know, because it's their rail. And it's basically, they need to save their rail. So as part of a PR project for them, they should be cooperating and helping us. At least build the spur lines, shuttle the stuff down to the beach first, directly dump it from the trains. Don't get trucks involved and clog up the 5 freeway some more. And taking the soil from the back of the dam there, whether we do it with conveyors or just a short shuttle hop of the truck to fill up the trains, is a project I would like to do and wonder if any of you are interested in it. I'm going to contact the one professor that was in here and get some satellite or some drone footage of that. But one thing I've learned in life is you got to walk the site. I think we ought to walk the site. Get up on top of the dam. I think you're allowed to get up on top of the dam because the thing is turned into a giant interchange. So getting the sand out of there so the dam can retain more water is going to protect that interchange anyways. If you've driven by it lately, it's just huge. It's enormous. So there's a hell of a lot of opportunity here for a couple businessmen, and those are some good ideas. A harbor, a tunnel, and create this a business opportunity. Berkshire Hathaway should subsidize it. We might even be able to design it so they actually make money out of it. So, anyways, thanks for your time, folks. What a long meeting.
Thank you. Not ready. let us move on to unfinished business. Subcommittee updates on work plan items. So the first one is sand acquisition subcommittee. Any comments from Rick and John and Dee?
I'll speak on behalf of the committee. I'll be brief. Our focus is on the borrow site investigation. The city, Leslie, are doing a wonderful job in identifying multiple potential sources for sand replenishment, multiple entities, different timelines, but they all need sand from somewhere. And by identifying a borrow site that is more proximate, it will lower our costs. We look at it as a huge potential as home run. So that's been our focus. I was in on a call with Leslie, Andy Hall, and Coastal Frontiers, and we all had a meeting with Leslie afterwards, and we're just very interested in that project. I want to communicate to this committee and to the public what's going on with that project because it is so vital and important. It's my
Wonderful.
report.
Great. Thank you. Any questions for them? No, let's move on. Sand retention subcommittee. That's John D. and Jacobs is gone, and there you are, Mr. Schmidt. Who's speaking?
I think John.
John?
I personally did not do any work on this subcommittee over the past few months. What about yourself, Matt? Do you have anything to report?
No, not at the time. It's good to see the feasibility study moving along, and that was last meeting. So, yeah, nothing to report this time.
Okay, thank you. Water quality subcommittee, myself, John, and Dee. I'll speak on this one, and my colleagues can when I'm finished. And just the mine's going to be short and sweet. We worked on water quality. We're still working on the Pochi project, and spent I'd say about 3 to 4 hours with Nikki and Dave and Zach and John and I, going through the last proposal that we put together that was about 25 pages, and we did what you asked us to do. We cut it in half, and it might even get slimmer next time I talk to you. So we uncovered certain things that stand out to us and discovered things that we should have thought about ahead of time. So this was a good learning lesson for us, but mostly really revealing on Pochi and the history of Pochi and where we can go with that. So we're pretty excited about that. John, do you want to ask offer anything else?
No, just that the presentation itself is kind of changing the emphasis. Originally, that presentation that I put together was a review of I can't remember the full name of the report. It's the acronym CHWSRS report, and but we're changing the emphasis to more for public education of what the problem is at Pochi, sort of what's been done to date, and what the plans are for the future. So it's going to be cut down to size, and then have that particular emphasis.
Thank you. Alrighty. That closed. So 4B, consideration of providing Coastal Advisory Committee presentation on water quality to the City Council. We're going to put that at bay right now. As I said, we're working on that. We're moving on it, and our goal is to move forward. Both of those. So thank you very much.
So when would that presentation be given, Susan?
It could be given in January. However, with things coming in, with new people coming on the City Council, and since we're changing it to a more of a educational type of thing in history, and what can be done, we're going to be waiting until the City Council has room for us.
Okay.
And I'll let everybody know.
Okay.
Okay, so 5 is new business. Do we have any new business?
There's no item scheduled on there.
Okay.
Business.
Number 6, items from staff. A, coastal items updates.
I was just going to report that the Water Quality Subcommittee in mid-October visited the Prima and DeSasha landfill and learned a lot about that from some of the engineers at that facility and asked some questions about how that may or may not affect the Poche water quality. It's a good tour. There's some materials in the back of the room where there were earlier today. You can also find the same materials that I emailed the full committee shortly before that site visit. And then the second, 6B, if I can skip ahead, another other item from staff is the AB 1234 training update. 3 members of this committee need to take your ethics training. That's required within 6 months of starting any city committee. So check your city email if you haven't looked at that in the last month or 2. It's a training that you can do either online or will be offered here in 2 weeks.
Great, thank you, Zach. Items from committee members. We want to start down here with Rick. Do you have anything? Okay, John?
No, I don't have anything.
Yes, John?
I'll just make a quick comment. As we all know, unfortunately, Measure BB did not pass. It's very important that the city identify a new funding source or funding sources for all the projects that we're looking to advance here on behalf of this committee. I think that if we look at maybe why, some of the reasons why we didn't get over the threshold, some may have been just I think overall it was probably a lack of information. It was a high bar to reach. We had a lot of we didn't have a lot of time to educate the population, and so I would just encourage everybody on this committee to redouble their efforts to educate the public on the measure, its importance. And so in the event it does get reintroduced, or a measure like it gets reintroduced, we'll have a better shot at getting it passed.
When's the next election cycle that would be
Yeah, that was
is it a 2-year cycle or a annual?
Zach, do you know the answer to that?
I don't want to guess. I thought it was every 2 years.
I thought it was every 2 years, so, okay.
And it can't be, sorry, and it can't be reintroduced as its exact same measure,
That's right.
right?
Yeah, that's correct.
I guess I'd ask the city if there's any kind of for next meeting, if there's any suggestions on what us as a committee can do to contribute to some sort of pushing along that necessity of funding for our coastal infrastructure.
I can get back to you with a general summary of options. I think certainly some broad recommendation could be part of your work task for the council. Whatever you
Yeah,
want
so
to
I was
viable.
gonna say add it to the agenda item next meeting if you could present that would be, I don't know, sorry.
So you want staff to give an overview and then you all can discuss it as an agenda item?
I think that's fine.
Does the committee agree with that? I guess, right?
I'd like to have something of this nature on the agenda, because I think, to the point earlier, the measure came at the very end, I think right up against the deadline, and it didn't give a whole lot of, change from 1.5%, I think general, there's a whole different range of options, and it came out to something without a whole lot of comment. And I think if we can get the city's view on this earlier, and maybe, I don't know if it's something that we would make a recommendation and then the city pick up, but I just think getting that way ahead of this would be really helpful, especially because I think one of the options that's out there is a citizen driven action, and I think citizens knowing what the city's plan is for this, whether it's going to be reapplied or whether we're done with it, I think that's going to be really helpful for whatever the next step is. So I think having it in some form at the next meeting would be really helpful.
I do too, and I think part of the issue was education and public community information. There were great ads in the paper, but we needed more. And we needed more community members and things of that nature, and we can do that. I had talked to somebody, a well-known activist in the city, and suggested that he put up a table like we used to do. You don't have to say, you're not doing it on the part of this particular committee, but you're doing your volunteer work at the table, and you would be passing out educational information, answering questions, and et cetera. And that there's a group that could be just put together with certain committee members, with staff on the, initially staff on that board or on that committee, because I know staff can't be involved in the planning, et cetera. But, and then other community papers, maybe from the chamber or something like that. I think if we have a flow of people, the thing that I recommended to this gentleman was to sit out there at the farmer's market. And because we know him and he's done all kinds of things for nonprofits before, the man who operates that. But I don't think anything happened because I never heard back from the gentleman who said he would do that. So there again, we have to be cohesive if we're going to start looking at this and decide what kinds of things. And of course, the most important thing is to talk to our city representatives and our city council or their staff and tell us if we're on the right page.
I want to make a comment. I said I didn't have a comment, but I do have a comment. And as a follow-on to what you both said, I'm a huge advocate of the importance of communication and information to the public.
Yeah.
The fact that the BB was given such a short amount of time, there was in fact nothing in the voter guide talking about it, defining it for the marketplace. At the same time, I was distressed, and maybe this is a personal comment, I don't know whether this is appropriate for the committee, but the OCTA, I think, has a staff of dozens and dozens of really good, full-time, paid PR people. And they're continuing to do a really good job of communicating their success. The recent Sun-Times, Second Money Times front page article talked about how the OCTA had been given $125 million to solve the problems of sand. So that's really a disinformation on their part that we need to counter with our own information. So if they're, I think one of the main culprits of our issue, if they're being so aggressive, we need to be cognizant of what they're doing and proactive on our own part to counter that with information, education. So whether that's something, a subset of our committee or another group that's within the city, we need to make sure that our part of the story is put out there and that their part of the story and their disinformation is pointed out to the market, to the audience. I keep saying market because they get commercial.
What disinformation?
Pardon me?
Excuse me, no, this isn't public comment.
That's my interpretation of that, but
Well, you know,
if they say that we've got 125, 150 million, whatever it was, and it's going to be to provide coastal defense. I'm paraphrasing. I looked for the article today and couldn't find it. It's from about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And they did get a great award, but how are they going to spend that? Are they just going to put more riprap in, or are they going to put sand in? So I'm just speaking to the fact that information to our city is very, very important.
well, I agree. I think it would be important if you put yourself on that committee as well, because you have that industry, you're a business owner of public affairs, correct?
Somewhat, yeah.
Okay.
So,
If you have the time to do that, we'd appreciate it.
Susan, do we go and ask to put on the agenda next meeting a discussion to create a subcommittee? Would that be prevalent to a subcommittee for? See, it toes the line with kind of finance, right? And that's not part of our purview to a degree, right? But it also goes to education. So I just don't know, like, what an action item looks like from us to push this thing forward to create. Rick, is what you're
I don't know
saying.
either. When I was on Beaches and Parks, it seemed like we talked about a lot of issues that were really relevant and that we had input on, but we didn't know how to communicate that to our citizens. So I don't know whether that's something falls within our purview or not.
Well, that with committees, the director of that committee would tell you the kinds of things that she's expecting and he or she is expecting, and probably have a format of what to do and what to follow, and that's what probably we should discuss, if we're going to put it on the agenda, a general discussion about this, and maybe Zach can put some kind of format together that we can look at and talk to.
My comment would be that it's not within our purview to form another subcommittee, because
Right.
we've already settled on a work plan that was advised by the council, but I think you could fit that topic into the subcommittee that you're on, related to sand acquisition, communicating the city's strategy or needs or process. So I would discuss that amongst yourselves. Also, we're gonna need a motion to continue the meeting if we go for more than 1 or 2 more minutes.
Well, are there
I think
anything
we're
from, anybody else have committee member, comments?
No, I just wanted to make sure that whatever that I do at the next meeting, I think we should discuss whether it's the staff making a presentation on what options are available, whether we make a recommendation, whether we're just staying out of it. I think it's an important topic in terms of what the follow-on to BB is, if anything.
I do too.
So I don't know what that would look like.
We will add an agenda item addressing that topic, and then if you want to riff off of that agenda item, or if you want to speak in your committee member updates about communication strategies more closely related to rail infrastructure, that's sort of a subtopic. But we'll add at least one agenda item.
Great. We got 60 seconds. Kill it.
I move that we adjourn.
Adjournment?
Seconded.
Wait a minute, you've got to read the whole thing.
Oh.
Who's
I
sorry?
make a motion to adjourn to the next scheduled meeting on Thursday, January 16th, at 4 p.m., City Hall, Council Chambers, San Clemente 92673.
Second.
Seconded. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for your contributions tonight. You were just incredible with our speakers as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was great.
Keep us on time.
Yeah.